from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by.
Because it's very noisy when I bang the gavel. Good afternoon and welcome to the London Assembly Environment Committee meeting at 2 o'clock on Thursday, the 12th of June. You're very welcome to join us. Thank you for joining us today. We're going to be exploring the implications of the new national and local spatial planning approaches for London's environment and biodiversity. We're going to be focusing on the vision for nature in the city, as outlined in the Mayor's consultation on the next London Plan, within the context of the London Local Nature Recovery Strategy, which is going to be coming out for consultation soon, and the London Green Infrastructure Framework. and I'm sure they're going to be turned into some horrible acronym like LGIF in the fullness of time. However, before we get started and going into that, I've got a few items of business. First of all, can I remind everybody that if you have a phone, can you please put it on silent and don't leave it in front of the microphone, as it can still be picked up if it makes small noises, even if it doesn't ring. If you need to adjust your microphone, could I ask if you move it towards you or move it away? Please do not pick it up by the neck, the gooseneck, because that breaks it. And you will be charged? No, you won't be charged, but people will be cross, facilities management. So please lift it up from the base if you want to move it around. Members of the public are encouraged to follow us on social media at London Assembly, on X, to use the hashtag Assembly Environment for this meeting. Right, moving on to the slightly more substantive information, I'd like to ask our committee officer, Sal Fazal, to confirm whether we've received any apologies for today's meeting.
Thank you, Chair. Apologies have been received from Assembly Member Roberts, for whom Assembly Member Bukhari is attending as a substitute.
Second item on the agenda, found on pages 1 to 4, is declarations of interests. Can I ask the committee to note the recommendations set out at item 2 and ask if members have got any other interest to declare? No. Noted. OK, thank you. Nothing else. Item 3 is minutes, pages 5 to 44. Can I ask the committee to confirm the minutes of the meeting held on the 14th of May? Are those agreed? OK, I will then sign those as a correct record. The next item is item 5, which is the... item 4, which is the summary list of actions on pages 45 to 68. Can I ask the committee to note the completed ongoing actions coming out of previous meetings and the additional correspondence that we've received? Is that noted? Thank you. Action taken under delegated authority. Can I ask the committee to note the action taken by me under delegated authority following consultation with party group lead members, namely to agree the report involving Londoners in the pathway to net zero by 2030, as set out in Appendix 1. Is that noted? Thank you. And can I also ask the committee to note a minor clerical error in the agenda report, which incorrectly states that this action was taken by the former chair. Clarification, the former chair, the consultation was conducted while the former chair was the chair. However, I, as the current chair of the committee, have formally signed the members' delegated authority form regarding this matter. Is that noted? Thank you. It's very technical. Finally, London's Plan for Nature, item 6. Really like to welcome all of our guests who've joined us today. I almost feel like saying particularly Alice Roberts, because she's been here 47 times already this week. I think you did. Was it just the Planning Committee, or there's been a few more? Who knows? Almost as many as us. But slightly more seriously, you are very welcome, and I'm now just going to introduce everybody. We have Julia Baker, who is Head of Nature Services at Mott MacDonald. Thank you very much for coming. We have Richard Barnes, who's Head of Planning and External Affairs at the London Wildlife Trust. We have Elliot Newton, who is the Director of Rewilding at Citizen Zoo. We have Alice Roberts, who I just referred to, who's Head of Campaigns and very busy at the moment from the campaign for the protection of rural England, CPRE London branch. We have Jeff Sinclair, who is Superintendent for the Commons from the City of London Corporation. And finally, we have Simone Turner, who is the Interim Ecology and Adaptation Lead from Hammersmith and Fulham Council and is a member of the mafia of the, as some people call it, the London Borough's Biodiversity Forum. You are very welcome to be with us, Simone. Thank you so much for coming. Right, we are now going to move on into our questions, and as is entirely traditional, we're going to start with a question or two from me as the chair. And the first one of this, and usually we are going to try and come to just one or two of you to answer a question. If you have a burning comment that you want to throw in, put your hand up. But otherwise, if we ask all 6 of you to comment on everything, the meeting will go on till about 10 o'clock tonight. So we can't do that, and I'm sure you don't want to stay until then either. But the first one, really, I'm going to ask all of you to answer so that we can get into the space that we want to be in this afternoon. The Mayor, as you know, is consulting on the principles to underlie the next London plan and will shortly begin a public consultation on the local nature recovery strategy for London. What overall vision for nature would you like to see for the capital? And are there any species or habitats that need particular attention? So what overall vision for nature would you like to see for the capital in the context of these consultations? And are there any species or habitats that need particular attention? And I think I'm going to start with Richard Barnes first, if you don't mind, because you may have some thoughts about species and habitats particularly.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, we do. We are pleased to have worked with the GLA's Green Infrastructure and Local Nature Recovery Strategy team on working up some of the background information to the LNRS, and are looking forward to that being published. I think the overall vision is looking for nature recovery. That's one thing London Wildlife Trust have noted, that we're no longer a nature conservation organisation because it's gone past that. We need to recover nature. So, sort of the general concept is a diverse habitats and species in London thriving in everyone's neighbourhoods. We're very keen on access to nature as well. In terms of specific habitats, we do have a range in London. Some of them are very iconic. We do even have remnants of lowland bog. There's one down in Bromley. There's 6 sites in London, one in Merton. There's things like the chalk grassland, which is very unique to England, and we've got a fantastic assemblage in South London and a tiny little bit in Hillingdon as well. So there's other waterways, and one of the issues that I'm sure a lot of people have read about is the state of the waterways in London and elsewhere in the country, and that's one thing we're keen to address. So that would be a very quick summary. I could talk for longer, but I'll leave it there for others to
Thank you, Richard. That's really helpful, and I'm very fond of the acid grassland on Tooting Common myself because it's in my own backyard. So we have great nature in both Merton and Wandsworth. Julia, can I come to you next? So from your perspective, we've got the London Plan, the Nature Recovery Strategy, and the Green Infrastructure Framework. What are you hoping to see for the vision as it's developing?
First of all, I think this conversation is incredibly welcome. For people to clearly take a stand and to put nature on the agenda is really, really welcome. You know, we're in a time of great political change, and for London to be a standout, no, nature's important, we have a vision, just stands apart to the importance of this conversation. I think the overall vision, and I just share Richard's view about nature's recovery, but if you think about the problems that people in London face, this could be people living here, people working here, people travelling through, whatever problems that you're thinking about, be it health, be it physical health, mental health, lack of jobs, nature's always part of the solution. So the London vision for nature, if we truly think about the problems that people face and how nature, it's always part of the solution. We just need to really recognise it and make sure that it's inherently valuable, because then nature will stay and it will just be a part of what we do in London. But more importantly, from where I'm coming from, really a part of the development plan. When we think about London or development that's taking place, nature should be an integral part of it, because we will need it to be under climate change. When it's incredibly hot, what do people do? They find a tree to sit under, you know, things like that. So to put nature's recovery and enhancement in the context of being the solution for London, people, our economy, social and mental health, I think London can set such an example for others to follow. In terms of species, I think allowing species to move under climate change, because right here, right now, you know, it's so, and you'll know this more than anyone, the species that we have, it's going to be really understanding how our native species will thrive and adapt to the pressures under climate change, and even more pressures from development, and just making sure that we are protecting the ones that are valuable here and now, but understanding that that will change as we move forward to that. Thank you.
Thank you. That's a really interesting last point about change in species. Our last meeting, which we've just agreed the minutes to, we were discussing very focused in on trees, and part of the discussion was talking about, you know, trees have a very lengthy lifetime. They're not just around for 50 years. And, you know, are we planting the trees now that are going to be able to survive the climate in 150 years' time? We're going to Kew next week to go and have a look at what they're doing at Kew on that matter. Elliot, going to come to you next, if I may. Same question.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, everyone. I just want to reiterate Julia's comments really on the welcome nature of this discussion. So yeah, thank you for chairing this and welcoming this discussion. I think can I quickly go a tiny bit of context to praise my answer, if that's okay, Chair. I think much of the discussion today will be about obviously the pressures that London faces under the housing crisis, etc. But I would want everybody in this room, everybody on this panel, just to recognise the ecological and climate crisis that we're currently facing. That the housing crisis is obviously a crisis of our time, but the ecological and climate crisis is really an existential threat that our species has, one of the biggest threats our species have ever faced, and it really does undermine the well-being of our society moving forward. So really having that at heart, welcoming the serious nature of that. Just to put it into some perspective, just from a UK context, I'm sure many people are aware of the State of Nature report, which was one of the most recent edition was in 2023, where that ranked 240 countries on the planet, and the UK came 224th on that list. We're in the bottom 10% of the global biodiversity. If we looked at our health service, if we looked at our economy, if we were sitting at the bottom 10%, that'd be an absolute disgrace, really, wouldn't it? So I think thinking about recognising the ecological situation that we currently find ourselves in is a really important thing to do as we take this discussion further. And bringing that to, and obviously biodiversity is our life support system, as Julia was sort of mentioning, and we need to really look after, it's fundamental to our community health. I just want to bring it to a London focus just quickly. There was a really interesting report that was published by WWF and Rewilding Europe in 2020, and that actually ranked 25 European capitals across Europe, and out of those 25, London came 24th in terms of ecological integrity. So, there's a lot of good stuff going on in London, but I think we just be mindful of where we sit in terms of European, that particular research. But however, I truly believe, going back to sort of the point I've already made about London has a true ability to be a true leader in this space. London has led many things in the past. I think we have a real opportunity here to show the world how we can embrace nature in an urban context. And there is precedent to that. Chair, your own constituency, which has Wimbledon Common in it. Wimbledon Common was declared in 1871. That was one of the first times on the planet that the humans actually declared a space for nature. So a really incredible sort of feat, and that has led to so many future things that have helped with nature within the UK. More recently, the London National Park City, something I very much welcome, and bringing new thoughts to how we can envision nature within our landscapes. London has 16,000 other species living in it. We have 1,600 wildlife sites. There's 20% of our capital is covered by sinks. So this is a really positive thing. So there's some really great things that have happened, and I welcome the LNRS moving forward and the really great work that the Green Infrastructure team have been doing and the consultations. I'm looking forward to delving into that discussion later. But I think just to sort of conclude what I'm sort of trying to say here is I really think London should be a leader in this space. There was a fantastic report published last month by University of Sydney, which was a global analysis of rewilding in urban spaces, and it even featured a project that I'm very involved in, which is the Ealing Beaver Project, which Assembly member Bassam, I've had the pleasure to show you around the site, which was absolutely fantastic. But it really demonstrated by embracing rewilding principles in our urban environments can have true and holistic benefits for society. Nature-based solutions to climate can be fundamentally important. They can be a lot cheaper than our more technological solutions. So I implore us to really embrace nature-based solutions within our capital, and really being a leader on that. And it's a matter of social justice as well. Everybody has the right to engage with nature. Nature should be part of our daily experience. In the UK alone, 84% of our population live in urban environments. London's population is ever growing. So when we're thinking about where people are going to live in the future, it's not just about where, it's about how, and how do we want our people to live. And I truly think nature needs to be at the heart of that. And I really welcome this discussion, just really sort of thinking how we can embrace nature as part of every single one of our lives, part of our daily experience, to make our capital more resilient to the challenges of climate change ahead. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I'm going to move on to Alice, coming down the line. And again, the vision for nature as we move forward in the context of these big documents.
Thanks. I'll be brief. So I think that the Mayor has shown he's committed to biodiversity in the capital, and indeed there are targets for creation of habitat. There's also a very large number of strategies, and we're really, I don't think we can argue now about whether we need to do anything or not. It's really about the how, isn't it? And so we have all these strategies, and one thing that's coming through is about how those all link together. a strong, so CPRE London is coordinating input to the London Plan from a very large number of groups, environment groups in London, and one of the things coming through is about how green and blue need to be developed together. But more generally, we have the LNRS, we have the London Surface Water Strategy, we have the Green Infrastructure Strategy, there's a Rivers one as well, and there's one more which I can't remember because I don't have it in front of me. So all of those, I think the feeling is that there needs to be, and the London Plan, of course, needs to be brought together in action terms. And for me, the biggest issue is about land designation. So, you know, are we going to spend the next 10 years or a lifetime of negotiating with landowners, or are we actually going to designate land? And particularly, for example, you know, if you're trying to take water from a road drain, that's got to go in quite a particular location. So why, you know, the point now is really to start identifying these. And I do understand that the LNRS is partly about that, but then there's stage 2, which is actually making that happen. Yeah, so I think that's it for the start.
Thank you, Alice. That's really helpful as well. Jeff, do you want to build on what everyone else is saying? Obviously, you're coming slightly lower down, so in terms of the order here this time, but, you know, do you want to go?
Great, thank you, Chair. I mean, I'm very much here because I'm part of the team at the City of London that looks after their 11,000 acres of nature reserves within London. And I mean, and as a Scotsman, my view of London and nature wasn't very complimentary, I have to say, when I first came here. But we have some of the most stunning wildlife sites in the country and internationally. We've got 58,000 ancient trees, and that's something that we're the largest owner of them in Northern Europe, but London is of international importance for protection of these sort of ancient trees and the wood pasture landscapes, heritage sites. And that's in terms of a sort of city perspective on it. We've got these unique special sites. They need to be safeguarded, and that's kind of a simple word to say, because it's not just the sites themselves that need safeguarding, it's the landscape that they're functioning within. And, you know, we need to be thinking about making sure the space to, like, against some of the threats that they may be facing, but also the opportunities for these sites, because we have these sometimes postage stamp sites, but we could see them expanding and also linking up across the landscape, because if we want these species and habitats to be resilient to all the changes coming forward, then we need the Lawton principles of bigger, better and more joined up. Those sort of messages are really crucial for the nature of sites that we're managing. And in terms of species, I mean, I've mentioned ancient trees, but I think a species that is really fundamental to all this are human beings. And, you know, the recreational, the amenity, the health benefits of nature and living within nature is when we're starting to think about what the future will be like. You know, nature, it brings a whole range of different benefits to us, which, you know, my figures are elsewhere, but we've done natural capital assessments on these wider benefits for Londoners. And, you know, that's the sort of context I think we need to be thinking about why these sites are valuable. There's a biodiversity crisis, which I'm sure people will talk about, but equally, I think making London a world-class city, as the city would say, but a world-class place for people to live and grow and develop in, it's, you know, it's part of the vision for the city.
Thank you. And you're here today because of those 11,000 acres that the City of London is responsible for. Clearly, it would be very difficult for us to be quite as nature-rich as Scotland, which is probably one of the most amazing places. And I would be interested to know, in the report that you referred to, the 24 out of 25, who the comparator cities were, because I suspect that probably quite a few of them were a lot smaller. And I think the large, you know, the megacities, because we're on the verge of being a megacity, which is categorised as 10 million people, and I think that's when it starts to be much more difficult. The logistics of how do you bring food in alone, it becomes much more complicated. However, Simone, I'm going to now turn to you. Your perspective, having listened to what everyone else has said, what would you like to add?
Thank you. I think the only thing I'd like to add is the things we'd really like to see from the overall vision is information and advice for landowners and land managers on how they can connect, enhance and help protect habitats for all the reasons that have already been provided by the other panel members. We all know that our London habitats, they're fragmented, they're under a lot of different pressures, and and it's essential for these overall strategies to provide us with advice on how we can increase biodiversity, help recover them, and help protect them. Thank you.
Thank you. And actually, both you and Jeff have sort of led on into another area that I would like to just briefly explore before I move on to other Assembly members, which is the whole area of how do we make that ecological network bigger, better and more joined up in a city with so many competing demands on land. Does anyone have any practical examples of places where, you know, that has been joined up in a better way? And maybe I'll come to you, Alice, first, because I know that CPRE has worked with a number of groups across London.
Well, I mean, the LNRS obviously will attempt to map out where the connections need to be made. So I think, you know, the issue there is how do we make it happen, and how do we take those bits of land that are in between and connect, for example, the woodland or the mosaic of habitat that we need. The other issue really is about corridors within London, and that might be along a river, but it might be along a road. And in that case, what needs to come into play is the grey space, and that would be anything from the road, so on-street suds or trees or other greening, but also gardens, so front and back gardens, and even roofs to some extent as well. That's
Yeah, we did an investigation which we called Greening Grey Infrastructure, very much along those lines. And certainly in my part of southwest London, we've been looking at how to join up all of the habitat along the River Wandle. And we've called a couple of bits where there's no join, the missing link, which obviously has other connotations as well. But and that seems to have worked well.
And that is in a particular area where the London Plan can help, because it can say things about front gardens and planning. And one particular thing that we will be asking for is for permitted development rights to be removed for conversion of front gardens for parking.
Okay, so specifically removing PDR. Right. Does anyone else want to come in on that, or shall we move on to the other questions? Simone, you want to come in as well? Thank you.
Yeah, just very briefly, I think it's really important to engage with different stakeholders, particularly those whose land is already a sort of corridor. So I'm mainly thinking about TfL land and National Rail land, because that is, particularly for overground sites, how we can link different habitats. But also, as mentioned by Alice, the public. So in Hammersmith and Fulham, an equal amount of our land is open space as it is private gardens. So it's so important to engage the public on what they can do to link habitats.
Yeah, that's definitely true. If you go to somewhere where there's a bat population, and, you know, as dusk arrives, you know, the bats don't care whose garden they're flying over and whose tree they're flying around. So that's absolutely true. Can I just come to Elliot? A recent focus of the Mayor, as we were just mentioning, has been to support rewilding projects in the capital. Do you expect rewilding to be part of the nature recovery strategy? And what do you think has been learnt from the projects, other than the fact that it's quite hard to get Assemblymember Mahfouz to come into the building because he'd rather spend all his time searching for beavers in his constituency? And how possible is it to implement large-scale rewilding projects in London?
Well, thank you for the question, Chair. And I think it's very personal. I think rewilding is a word that gets it's sometimes challenging to define. And there's a lot of questions around how we define it. But to my mind, rewilding has two main elements to it. One is embracing ecological processes, allowing the ecosystems to function, but also rewilding people, engaging people, can reconnect them to nature. You know, 9 million people in London, there's a real opportunity here to engage. So rewild so many people, I would say it's probably the best opportunity in the world to engage such a diverse community of people in nature on a day-to-day basis. So I'm of the fundamental belief that rewilding can be integrated into London, and there's been some fantastic work led by the Mayor and the GLA already, with the Rewilding Task Force and the Rewilding Action Group, which has been led by the GLA and the London Wildlife Trust, to identify rewilding areas at larger scales across London. And I think that's been a really positive outcome, with identifying big scales of rewilding that we can do. But I think also to echo some of the comments earlier, like if a child comes to me and says, Elliot, I've just rewilded my balcony by putting pollinator-friendly plants and a bird feeder up, I'd say, yes, that's absolutely rewilding. You've managed to transform a space that previously couldn't support nature to now a place that can. So I think it's about scale, it's about engaging people, but I fundamentally think rewilding, and also it's a word that engages people, it brings hope. So I think it's incredibly powerful and should be used in every way possible to get people connected to nature and also encourage people to do.
Yes, I mean, joking aside, actually, Assemblymember Fizz has been an incredible ambassador for involving people in the nature recovery that has been taking place in his constituency. So I think what you're saying very much speaks to that. Okay, I'm going to move on to my colleagues now, and there will be. We're going to start with questions from Assemblymember Bukhari.
Thank you, Chair. My question is to Simone and Jeff, and it's on the evidence gathering process to inform the local nature recovery strategy. I'm quite interested to know what actions and resources are needed to close any evidence gaps and potentially designate new areas also of sites of importance in nature conservation. So firstly, tell me your experience about the gathering of data and what we need to do next for actions and resources for sinks.
Right. Thank you for that, Assembly. I mean, the city, I'm on a bit of a journey this myself on the sites that I manage. We've done a lot of survey work on all the sites that we hold. And a lot of that we store on digital databases such as Gaggle and with other county wildlife trusts. But our records just still a lot on paper and haven't been uploaded. So one of the things with all the planning issues that are coming into face is we know the information resources out there aren't as current and up to date as they could be. And, and we're relatively well resourced in doing that. So if I'm having challenges with that, I would suspect in the wider landscape, there might be information out there, but it's not accessible to lots of people. And that's an anxiety when we're looking at plan actions on land. There's the biodiversity mapping that has been done with the LRS journey is excellent. Really, I get quite excited about it, all in a very Anaraki sort of way, but it's really exciting. But it can also give you an illusion that we're much more on it, and there's an element of being overconfident on the information that you have there. So I'd say there's information out there that may not be accessible, and then there's also gaps where we haven't done those sort of survey work. So there's a few anxieties I would have with that.
For me, I first have to commend the GLA officers. They've done an absolutely amazing job of gathering evidence, I think. They've actually joined the London Borough Biodiversity Forum. They've attended every single meeting that I have to provide an update. They've invited council officers and other stakeholders to many in-person workshops, to online consultations. They've done webinars. It's really been excellent seeing what they've done. On your second question, I'm definitely in agreement with Jeff, and there's not actually a requirement for local authorities to update their SINC reviews, their sites of importance for nature conservation. So I think there is quite a big difference in where boroughs are at with that. I think quite a few haven't done this for many, many years. I'll admit my own council, we've not done it for 10 years, but we're doing it at the moment. So, yeah, thank you.
I mean, are there any challenges that you want to raise now with us about why you think there might be those gaps?
I do think there is a lack of capacity to do SINC reviews. I mean, it's business as usual in a way, but it's also not something that you can really apply for funding for. It's not a capital project where you're actively, installing a new pond or a wetland or some really exciting habitat. So you need capacity and funding for doing these sorts of activities, but since they are information gathering, they're not as exciting as other projects which tend to secure the funding. So I think that is probably the major gap.
So data does get a bit boring, doesn't it, sometimes, unfortunately, but it's important. So thank you for raising that. I do want to also ask you about the 48 local nature recovery strategies that are being created across England, and London is one of them. Can you tell me more about how far along the other ones are and what kind of lessons we can be learning from those that are already advanced in that process? Sophie, sorry, Simone.
I'm afraid I don't really have that information. I don't know if anyone else on the panel might.
No? Yeah, Richard. Oh, sorry, Jeff, do you want to go first and then Richard?
I was just going to say I'm involved with Buckinghamshire, Slough and Surrey local nature reserve strategies. So Buckinghamshire had the advantage in that they were one of the pilots, so well advanced, and it really, as with I think your team here as well, we're very hands-on, and it's a really engaged process. And they're all working to the same time scales and seem to be on board to deliver as and when needed, really.
Thank you. I was just going to, confirm there were 5 pilots. Buckinghamshire was one of them, so that's probably why they're a little further ahead. They are at varying scales. I would say one of the bigger difficulties for London is having 32 or 33, including corporations, City of London, authorities underneath. So it's quite a different framework to some of the other county local nature recovery strategies.
Just to clarify, do you know if London will be very different from those other ones? And the guidelines for the government around LNRSs are quite strict, aren't they? So what kind of differences do you think you can see?
Well, one difference is that although the GLA is the responsible authority, it doesn't necessarily have the ability for delivery in terms of owning land and that part of it and being that player, but it is doing a good job of setting strategic direction. But it doesn't have the advantage that some others have actually been able to do things on their own land. And yes, there's sort of the working through, the delivery will be through the London boroughs mostly.
Just quickly, we did look at a number of other LNRSs from around the country, and there were some interesting differences. I can send you more details, but I think, for example, they were looking at designating specific sites, but also looking at sites which had potential, not just current sites. So when they did a kind of call for sites, it was for both. Has this got potential to deliver new habitat? Is it already delivering habitat? But I can send you what we found.
Yes, if you could share that with us. I mean, it's not come out yet, but we did have a private briefing with the team who are working on it, and I think that probably will be incorporated into the London local nature recovery strategy when it emerges for consultation. I'm going to move on from Assemblymember Bukhari to Assemblymember Polansky.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks for all being here, and particularly the urgency with which we're having this conversation. I think, Julia, you put it well when you said nature has to be on the agenda. I've got a few questions, but I also want to echo something that Alice said, I think, at the Planning Committee, which was very often those of us who are protecting nature get put in a binary against housing, but we know we have a housing crisis and we absolutely can build housing, but housing will not solve the affordability crisis. I think Alice put that really well. Julia, on the LNRS, there's the designation of strategic significance. What do you expect this to do, and how can this prioritise both environmental protections and enhancements?
Thank you for the question. Is that in relation to biodiversity net gain?
Yes.
Yeah. So with biodiversity net gain, if developers deliver biodiversity net gain in ways that support delivery of a local nature recovery strategy, you essentially get additional habitat units. I am not now on a biodiversity net gain project, and I'm on quite a few, where we are not asking for local nature recovery strategies. And this includes the major water and energy infrastructure projects that we have. Since early this year, whenever we start a biodiversity net gain project, the first thing that we do is reach out to local planning authorities, reach out to London Wildlife Trust, and we say, is there any way that we could share or have a discussion about your local nature recovery strategy, please? It's becoming so commonplace, and actually quite a few people, especially around certain areas, are getting quite fed up with me saying, is it ready yet? Because it's the right thing to do. The heart of biodiversity net gain was always to make a contribution. And, in the past, we used to look at local biodiversity action plans or say, how can we deliver 10% B&G that supports your plans and ambitions, wishes for nature? So for us in industry, it's essential.
Thank you. Simone, if I can move on to you, how would you anticipate responding to the priorities identified in the local nature recovery strategy? And are there sufficient resources and mechanisms available to translate strategy into action?
Sorry, could you repeat that question just so that I capture all the aspects of it?
Yeah, of course. So the first part is about anticipating.
Microphone.
First part is about anticipating responding to the priorities in the LNRS. And second is, do you have the resources and mechanisms available to make that strategy into action? Maybe just do the first part first, and then I'll nudge you on the second part. So how would you anticipate responding to priorities?
Brilliant. So I think from what I've seen of the draft local nature recovery strategy so far, it does have a few overarching priorities and then a few habitat-specific priorities. So I think we'd focus on looking at the map they've provided and seeing what of those habitats do we have within our borough, and then look at the measures that they recommend for how we can enhance those habitats on our land. I'm sorry, I'm not sure I'm answering your question.
No, that's okay. I guess my follow-up might answer it though. So when you say to enhance for habitats, do you feel like you have the necessary resources and mechanisms to be able to enhance habitats?
I think the resource which will come more than any other is from biodiversity net gain. Right. So my understanding is that the LNRSs and biodiversity net gain are supposed to go hand in hand. So where developments need to achieve off-site credits or statutory credits, that will enable us to fund those measures to increase and enhance those habitats which have been identified. Outside of those opportunities, it is quite limited. We are reliant on external funding from, for example, the GLA, the Forestry Commission to plant trees, and so on. So there isn't a large range of opportunities for us to get those resources, but they do exist.
Thank you. Jeff wanted to come in.
Thank you for that. The way I would approach it, it's a fantastic tool for me, because I'll give you a specific example. One of the sites I manage is Burnham Beeches, and it's a special area of conservation and National Nature Reserve. And I'm looking at the maps for the South East Bucks and their map for the biodiversity mapping, opportunity mapping, and the Colne Valley mapping areas. It opens up how I can see a sort of landscape scale approach to my comments to the planning system, and start formulating a more informed strategic vision on how we can safeguard Burnham Beeches through the various challenges it's meeting. And we're doing that, but it's there now on a map from yourselves and others. So it's a real helpful planning and development tool. Also, if I'm looking for funding, things that I can key into those as a means of accessing resources. I spent my whole working life spending other people's money, and quite frankly, the resourcing isn't there to cover biodiversity net gain. Won't help me from any of the sites I manage, because they're all established nature reserves, and there's little opportunity for biodiversity net gain. So we're all, and there's a lot of existing sites that still need a lot of work and improvement and things and work to be done there to just tackle some of the changes coming our way, or that we're already facing. Big subject, but I'd say resources aren't there, and but yeah, there's opportunities there through the work that your teams and others have been doing.
Thank you, Elliot.
Just to sort of reiterate those points a little bit, but from my perspective, I also worked for local authorities in South West London for about 5.5 years, as well as now I run a small sort of rewilding NGO. And just pointing on the resourcing element, I do think B&G would be really interesting to see how that is a delivery mechanism for the strategic significance of delivering biodiversity. But fundamentally, I do think there is a large funding gap for conservation action within the capital. The GLA has put some fantastic funds together. The Rewild London Fund principally is a really good fund of that. We've received some funding to achieve the Ealing Beaver project. And that was, for there we actually managed a relative amount of funding, a small amount of funding, we were able to achieve a huge amount, to the extent with the amount of biodiversity we've seen revive on this site through embracing natural processes, to even the local train station wasn't flooded last year because of the beavers actually holding water back. So I think, there's not a huge amount of funding out there for conservation, but when we actually allocate it, you can achieve a lot, and compare that to more sort of more technical engineered solutions for combating climate change. Nature can be a great investment and have a whole range of co-benefits socially, environmentally, and also for climate proofing. So fundamentally, I do think there is still quite a large funding gap.
It's my job to ask silly questions sometimes, but what's the danger if we don't fund it? How much does that cost us, the cost of inaction?
Well, counterfactuals are always a very challenging thing to talk about because scientifically maybe we don't have the data, but I think we know rewilding conservation does work. We can see nature recovery. If we don't do it, we know the challenges of climate change are significant, and investing in biodiversity is effectively investing in the future-proofing the capital to those challenges. But also from a social and mental health perspective, the benefits of people engaging with nature are absolutely huge. So I think it's a huge missed opportunity from a social health perspective, from a climate resilience perspective, but also forgetting we are one of the most nature-depleted countries on the planet. We need to invest in nature, but every bit we invest in nature, I assure you, will receive that benefit back in many ways. But yeah,
well said. And presumably the cost of flooding and things like that is a lot more expensive than just investing in the first place.
Maybe just Ealing Council had actually earmarked our beaver site for a wetland scheme that would have been it would probably costed quite a few zeros on that, but for effectively about £60,000, we were able to achieve the same social outcomes, the same climate outcomes, but because we invested in nature-based solutions. So I just want to reiterate the point: investing in nature can be a cheaper way to do it, but we don't have the money to do it in all of its. There's still so many opportunities out there that we need to take.
Thank you, and obviously it needs doing because nature deserves to survive. But if we can save money too, great. Yep. Richard.
Thank you. I was just going to mention there was originally planned, when local nature recovery strategies were being developed by the government, there was supposed to be a complementary funding scheme through the environmental land management schemes. It was going to be the middle tier, and it was not coincidentally called local nature recovery. That has been lost, and unfortunately countryside stewardship isn't filling the gap. It's quite complicated, and it isn't going to fund those sort of co-benefits, the nature-based solutions that Elliot was mentioning, that local nature recovery was due to fund. So it'd be interesting to see whether countryside stewardship can step up and produce more. But I know it's quite complicated. I'm not sure how many London boroughs access it. The ecologists I've spoken to haven't, certainly ones in sort of the more inner and central Londons, haven't found it easy to use because of the system. It's quite complicated. Thank you.
Thank you. Elliot, coming back to you. So agree entirely there's a funding gap, but putting that to one side, in terms of volunteers and local people, how can we get them more involved with local nature recovery so they're protecting, enhancing habitats and really feeling like the area, they value the commons?
Yeah, well, I think fundamentally we have a huge opportunity in London. So many people here living here, and I think a lot of people are willing to engage and help with their local green spaces, because the sense of well-being you get from that local ownership is fantastic. For example, when I was a manager of doing biodiversity work in South West London, we actually established about 30 friends groups across that particular borough. And for example, another one of our sites has over 300 volunteers supporting it. So and the cost benefit of that, if you were paying these individuals to do this, the cost would be absolutely just insurmountable and unachievable. So I do think fundamentally volunteering and empowering local communities to take ownership of their local environments can be incredibly powerful. But I think one thing we must not do is just see it as a get-out clause and just think, OK, we're going to hand this over to the volunteers. Volunteers need coordination. It does need a lot of paid sort of staff and coordination to help support these projects happening. So I think even though there's a huge opportunity there, you need to invest in that opportunity to enable us to seek the rewards of enabling people to do that. But as well as when you start allowing volunteers to get onto the site, you will see all sorts of antisocial behaviour reduces. That's I think everyone would probably agree with that. When you get a site that is loved by local people, typically receives a lot less antisocial behaviour.
Really well put. And then my final question, I want to caveat this with I love the Beaver Project, so this is in no way a slate of the Beaver Project. That would be unusual if I was coming for beavers. But it does worry me sometimes. I hear this from the mayor, that the beavers and the otters get a lot of the attention. They're the kind of big projects that he's excited about. And then things like the toads, the bats, the newts kind of just get literally thrown under the developer's bulldozer. How can we make sure that local people are valuing all nature and it's not just cute nature or nature that is easy to get buy-in for, but actually we need everything. We need all our species.
Yeah, absolutely. We need functional ecosystems that have all the species that help make that possible. But I do think we have certain species of what I like to call flagship species that maybe do have slightly more charisma. So the beaver, the water vole are a species that you can almost, they're like a gateway to enable people to sort of connect with nature. And once you sort of get them hooked in, you can then talk about the other species. One species that we're currently working on is actually white storks. And you might people know white storks. White storks are a species that are familiar with sort of ecological rebirth and regeneration and hope. And actually, you might be between 2016 and 2024 had over 400 white storks or 400 white stork sightings within Greater London. So what we want to try and do is use that species as sort of a talismanic species to recognise that within London we can have incredible nature by using these sort of celebrity species, but then use that as a hook to get people to think about the more curious species. We're about to start a project with London Wildlife Trust looking at German hairy snails, again, which might not be a so charismatic species, but fundamentally important. But the best thing about a species, is each species has a beautiful story to tell, and once you get them hooked in, there's endless amazing stories that we can try and hook people on. So I think ecological illiteracy in the capital is probably quite poor. Nature deficit disorder is something that we refer to it as. But I think using these charismatic species to start engaging people, you can then sort of bring them in and then start to open their eyes up to the amazing ecosystems that London has, the habitats that Richard was referring to. So I do think there's a real role for those cute species, but you, of course, cannot forget the 11 species of bat that we have in London.
Yeah, I like this answer, but I still think it reinforces some of the things that I think we need to be careful of, that if people get obsessed with the charismatic species, then we lose the less kind of ugly, in inverted commas, species, or the things that people don't care about as much. But I hear your point that it's a gateway to, I think, called nature deficit disorder.
Nature deficit disorder,
sure,
absolutely.
Get that. Thank you, Chair.
We found a really good way of engaging people is to buy some bat detectors. People love going out on the common at night, because when do you ever go out on the common at night? And of course, I think we've got about 3 or 4 of the bat species on Tooting Common. And it's great fun detecting where they are and then spotting where they are. Anyway, that's just what we do. That's what I do. I'm going to move over to Assembly Member Torrell, who's going to move on with some further questions.
Thank you, Chair. And these questions are to Alice and Richard. So starting off with on the Green Belt, what are your views about the options being considered to release area of the Green Belts to in London for development? If I start with Richard and then go to Alice.
Thank you. Well, as stated in the press release and in the consultation, it looks superficially positive, and I'm pleased to say it does seem to break that narrative about having a dichotomy between nature and housing. It does talk about nature and housing, so I was pleased to see that. But I was a little surprised to see some of the statistics in there about the accessibility of open space, and that only 13% of the Greenbelt was of value to Londoners. I mean, I know from the statistics I've got that in terms of accessible sites of importance to nature conservation, there's 30% is in the Greenbelt. 30% of the Greenbelt is accessible sink. And there's also other accessible open space outside of that, so there's about 36%. So that's what worries me, is that there's not enough information, and it does slightly go back to what has been discussed earlier. I know that some of the full habitat surveys and of boroughs, some of I think the most recent is about 10 years. I think it might be Hammersmith and Fulham's. Others are up to over 30 years old, or at least the survey data certainly hasn't been shared with Giggle, if any work has been done. So there's a whole range in between. So I think I'd be very careful about making some of the assumptions. I think I'd like to see a bit more of the evidence gathered on that.
Yeah, I mean, It's a real concern that the Greenbelt Review is really just about finding sites for housing. And as I went on at length about on Monday here, we don't really see that building housing is going to do anything to tackle the housing crisis anyway, which is at its fundamental, at its basis is about affordability. Adding in housing, is part of what we need to do, but it's not going to tackle the issue of the number of people we have in temporary accommodation. So the real concern though is if you go about a Greenbelt review without looking at the rest of what the Greenbelt can do for us, then you're missing 99% of the picture. You're not looking at the agricultural needs, you're not looking at the biodiversity habitat needs, you're not looking at the recreation, water management, trees, canopy cover, all of that. So for me, if you're looking at Greenbelt and indeed Metropolitan Open Land, really you ought to be looking at all of the needs that our green spaces provide, particularly when you consider how much brownfield land we have. I just kind of absolutely staggered really that there's any question about looking at green spaces which are providing by and large ecosystem services and in many cases recreation, and that brings me on to the really what I would say is bordering on offensive statement about golf courses in the London Plan consultation, which kind of seems to me to play on perhaps prejudices about golf. Whatever you may think about it, the fact is that even a cursory look online led us to pretty much every golf course in London has either SYNC or SSSI status. So, be careful what you wish for. And we would very much like that statement to be corrected in the London Plan consultation, where it says golf courses don't have any biodiversity effectively. This is a trope and should not be in a London Plan consultation, particularly, for a plan which has a huge evidence base and has historically, at least as far as since I've been looking at it, been very much evidence based. So yeah, really worrying, and we just feel very strongly that we shouldn't be losing Greenbelt, and we shouldn't be looking at Greenbelt. We certainly shouldn't be looking at Metropolitan Open Land. And to the extent that we might be looking at golf courses, perhaps we could consider, if the Mayor feels that golf is over-provisioned, then perhaps we should be looking at talking to the golf clubs and other sports clubs around London about what those sites might do in terms of recreation or other sports. As I think I said earlier, the sport isn't mentioned once in the London Plan consultation, and that needs to be rectified.
Thank you for that, Alice. I certainly hope the Mayor was listening to that response. Before I come back to you, Richard, can I put the same question to Julia, please?
Just to support and echo everything that we're seeing, we certainly work a lot with housing builders, and there's a lot of frustration in terms of really making accessible areas that were, maybe previously developed, or rather than open green spaces, because of the reputation risk and the objections that they might have. Now, with Biodiversity Net Gain, one of the challenges has been open mosaic habitats. And the consultation that's just been released by Natural England allows for much more flexibility for that. So Natural England have really recognised that, and that will certainly open up the door for that. But working very closely with housing developers, they want to do the right thing. They want to put houses where, not on places where certainly they would lose reputation or integrity, or just face a lot of objection. There's one quite near me, actually. I'm based in Canterbury, and there's so many sites that should be developed on rather than these new greenbelt areas. And that's where we should really have a look and make those enabling policies. Now, from a Biodiversity Net Gain perspective, Natural England's really looking at that and making sure that B&G can work much more flexibly when it comes to those.
Thank you. Richard, I wanted to come back on something you said on yours, because it was actually one of my questions was about, do you recognise the 13% of greenbelt as parks and areas of public accessing? I'm guessing that was a no from you, but the other part of that question is, was that statistic discussed with either you or your organisation?
From the evidence I've gathered, partly to double check some of this for this meeting, it does appear to be incorrect. As I said, the information I've got is that accessible sites of importance in nature conservation cover 30% of the green belt. So that doesn't seem to be tally with the figure in the press release. And I'm not aware that we were consulted. It may be that my colleague, who's been off sick on long-term sick, may have been contacted and not been able to respond. So I would caveat that about saying not being contacted. I just did want to just re-emphasise, yes, that point on golf courses. There's one in your constituency that's one of our reserves. And it's on the sides, it's on the roughs of the golf course, and it's got 3 species of orchids, and we're due to introduce sheep grazing on that part of it to maintain that chalk grass and to stop it scrubbing over. I do think, to go on some of the things that Elliot has mentioned, we also need to look at opportunity and potential of some of these areas. So LNRS is more of a policy and a strategy, but it isn't a designation. So it'd be interesting to look at whether there could be a designation about the potential areas and not just look negatively and say where we need to connect. Look at these. I mean, that work's been started with the Rewilding Task Force with their 11 zones, which are largely in the green belt. But a policy that the Wildlife Trust nationally are promoting for the NPPF is Wild Belt, which is about an actual designation, a land designation that secures that land positively for improvements. And I'd certainly say that B&G alone isn't the right measure to use to make sure that Greenbelt release is really delivering nature recovery and ecosystem benefits that we need. There's so many other factors involved.
Thank you for that. So back to the three of, opening up to the three of you again. She says, what are the implications of the government's new definition for grey belt? For what land could it now be considered for development? And is it possible for this grey belt land to be green or have high values for biodiversity?
I think so one thing that us in development, there's an awful lot of strategies and policy changes at the moment. And yet one more thing about the grey belt, and in all honesty, what we need is and someone said it earlier, you know, that real consolidation and that real simplification of the process. And while there's a specific discussion, you know, about these particular areas, we're facing so much policy change and uncertainty that it's actually about truly understanding what people need. And like you say, the root causes of housing, which we certainly agree with, is affordability, rather than tackling these individual, it just seems to be one thing after another at the moment. I'm sure my colleagues can talk specifically about that issue, but I just want to say that I think actually it's about consolidating and having one clear plan, which is about society, nature and people, and then really looking at that in a much more comprehensive aspect, rather than really specific nitty-gritty stuff, which becomes quite disruptive at the end of the day.
Thank you. I agree. I think it's getting more and more diffuse if you have green belt, grey belt, and even with wild belt. I do think the wild belt is a positive designation that should be considered. In terms of grey belt, again, I'd be concerned that is all the information there to determine what is or isn't grey belt. So, and I know that I'm sure Alice has been involved in inquiries where there's a lot of debate about that and arguments either way. But I think unless there's more up-to-date work done and survey work to confirm that is shared and is transparent and open, then I think it would be difficult.
Yeah, I mean, I think all I want to say on this is that the minute that you grey an area like this, you know, the protection works because it is a strong protection, because people believe that land will not be, you won't be able to develop that land. The minute that you put that thin end of the wedge in, that enables speculation. And of course, we already have a huge amount of speculation, land banking, and of course, what that does is force land prices up. So it doesn't actually achieve anything at the end of the day. What it achieves is higher land prices, and then you lose perfectly good land. So a lot of the land in London that is coming under threat is very clearly not grey belt. All of the land in Enfield, the land in Hounslow, these are not anything close to grey. They're not car parks. They're not already developed. They're not brownfield. They're just fields. So it's just, it just makes no sense from any perspective that we can see to introduce a grey belt policy of any kind.
Thank you for that. Coming back to you very quickly on this point, Richard, do you think it's realistic and achievable to release land in the Greenbelt for development and increase biodiversity overall?
I think subject to a whole host of measures, and that's the full assessments, and that's what's often missing from what's called the mitigation hierarchy. The first thing you should do is assess and then think about whether that is the right place. So I think there, as I've said earlier, I think there needs to be a lot more work done on assessment. I think it is possible, but for the reasons that Alice has said, I think you've got to be really careful. You've got to look at the right places. You've got to make sure that the analysis is correct and up to date. I think there are possibilities, but there'd have to be a lot of caveats, safeguards around it. I'm not saying it's not impossible, but there'd have to be a lot of things to satisfy people, and they have to be transparent and open.
Thank you for that. And I'm pretty sure the final question I've got has been answered. So.
Yeah, thank you. If I could just add to that. So I come from an inner city borough. We don't have any greenbelt land, but I did reach out to outer London boroughs to see what their opinion on this would be. And they have flagged that they have already had cases where there is development sort of on grey belt land, and it's already impacting sinks because proposals. So it isn't already impacting the sinks, but there is quite a large possibility that it will directly impact the sinks from habitat fragmentation, habitat loss, and increased usage of the site. So that really is a concern that will cause there to be the biodiversity value will decrease on these sites.
Thank you, and we do appreciate that you have reached out to others in the biodiversity officers across London there. I just wondered if I could come back to Richard. I know there's a couple of Assembly members who probably want to come in on this. And when we're aware of Trumpington Meadows, which is in the Greenbelt outside of London, which was gifted to the Wildlife Trust in 2022 and seems to have been a development that was on previously designated greenbelt land, but seems to have enhanced biodiversity and access to nature. Are you aware of other cases where this has happened? I was certainly, when I was working in Lincolnshire, there were some examples there of good developments that were planning to recognise nature all around them and really incorporate them into developments. Do you think that's something that we can realistically do in the greenbelt within and around London?
I think it's all context in individual sites. I've heard of that one, but I don't know the details of Trumpington. I know that sites that we've been involved in has been working usually on previously developed sites, so up at Woodbury Downs, working with Barclays there, and also at Kidbrooke, the Kidbrooke estate. But again, that's quite different. It's working on previously developed sites, and there has been an uplift because of perhaps an enlightened developer wanting to see this thing work together, about nature and housing work together. They've both delivered accessible improvements in wildlife and biodiversity in those two areas. Sadly, it seems to be the exception rather than the rule, and we're pleased to have worked with those two developers. I think it would be worth investigating the Trumpington one, but I wouldn't like to say at the moment because I don't know enough detail about it. I'm sorry.
It's in Cambridgeshire, so not particularly near to London. Thank you very much for that additional comment. I think Assemblymember Bakari wanted to comment.
Yeah, thank you very much, Chair. I want to go back to Simone, because you said that you've been talking to other boroughs, which has interested me as well. And I was actually at the Planning Committee meeting where Alice was observing that meeting, and the Deputy Mayor said it was grey belt first, then green belt. Now, is that something that's coming across within the work of the boroughs that you're hearing as well? That is definitely the message that's coming across, that they must now focus on building on grey belt first, then green belt.
So I think the messaging is it should be brownfield first and then grey belt, or at least that's my understanding. And I think those 5 golden rules, of which those first 2 are those rules, they are very strong. But I think one of the largest concerns we have is we know not every London borough has an ecologist or a biodiversity representative in their planning department. And on top of that, I might be skipping to a future question, but I think it is really relevant to this. There's a really high concern that the proposals of the Planning and Infrastructure Bill to remove the requirement for site-specific ecological assessments. If you've got a borough that doesn't have an ecologist and there's no longer that requirement, then it's highly unlikely that anyone is going to be able to recognise what actually is this land. And is it brownfield? Is it grey belt? Is it actually almost a priority habitat for London, which is open mosaic habitat, which to a lot of developers looks like wasteland, but in reality is a priority habitat. So I think there is quite a bit of concern about that.
Because what I've when I asked the Deputy Mayor about the processes of data gathering, and there is a Greenbelt review, there is apparently 18 boroughs that have been contacted, and that information is being gathered at the moment. Now, I presume you wouldn't be one of them because of the fact that you don't have Greenbelt.
Exactly.
But how are they deciding on the 18? Do you know? And is there any way that it's being done in a way that focuses on that question that you just said, that has a team that can really evaluate whether it's Greenbelt or not?
Yeah, I'm afraid I'm not sure. I don't know if Member Polanski would like to comment on that. Oh, okay.
Yeah, it's all right.
Sorry.
You can answer the question.
Yeah, sorry. No, I'm afraid I'm not aware of that review because I am an inner city, a London borough, but I can go out and get that information for you if you would like.
That would be great.
Assembly.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we'll be asking the Deputy Mayor later on as well some additional questions. But there is this concern about that term grey belt, the concern about the definition, the concern about missing data that Richard was talking about as well. And if those are concerns are coming through now, I'm worried that the councils are not going to have enough information themselves to provide the right information that is being gathered right now.
Yeah, I think it definitely is possible that they don't have that information, but I'll get that to you.
I think Alice wanted to come in, and then I'll bring in
I do spend a lot of time looking at Greenbelt reviews, like more than I'd really like to, frankly. They are all conducted in the same way, which is essentially to release parcels of land for development, and they look at the Greenbelt purposes, and now in theory they should be looking at whether it's like not very green. But like I said, Greenbelt is green. It's very rarely that it's not. This is a trope, again, that has just been put about to kind of make us feel that the Greenbelt's not valuable. So, so what they do is they just go around identifying bits of land which are usually wedged between kind of, or on the edge of London, wedged between perhaps two urban areas, which look like it might be a good place to put some housing. That's about it, really.
Okay, so you wanted to come in with a further question? Oh, sorry. Did
No, I was going to ask about this topic a bit.
Yeah. But did you want to come in on something else?
Yeah,
Sorry,
I think it was two quick things. Alice, Julie was saying about how developers put their management or their political their kind of reputation, but it sounds like you're questioning that in terms of they just want to build on the land, right?
Well, developers are, you get what you plan for. This is about the London plan. The London plan should be saying what we are able to get and want to have. It's not, the developers will do what they're able to do. It's not their fault, is it? And
right.
Yes, some might be better than others, but this isn't about them. It's about the London plan and what it should be making clear we need to do and need to have.
Thank you.
That's
I just wanted to get that in there. Simone, this might be too technical, in which case just say, I don't know. But I'm really concerned about contaminated land. And there's been lots of places, not necessarily in London, but there are some in London too that I visited around the country, where toxic landfill sites have been used to dump on ground, that then sometimes has become more biodiverse or sometimes gets earmarked for building. And I noted, I can't remember who it was, but someone was on the panel with Alice the other day who rubbished people who said, now they're saying you can't build on industrial land either. But my argument would be, yes, you can, but let's make sure the land is safe. The question I'm getting to is, as an ecologist, what work is there being done in collecting data about where land has been contaminated or is dangerous either for the public or for nature? I'll start there.
No, thank you. I'm afraid that is one of the things that I'm not very aware of when it comes to contaminated land. I think, like you said, it's really important. It needs to be safe for everyone, for biodiversity and for people. But I don't have that information for you.
That's fair. I realised it was quite niche. Thank you very much. Thanks, Chair.
Okay, so I'm now going to move on to Assemblymember McCartney and then Assemblymember Mahfouz.
Thank you. And in part, the Chair asked a little bit of what I'm going to ask you. But my question, I would particularly like to refer it to Julia, Richard and then Alice, if I can. But it's about, if we were to build on the Green Belt, what would the circumstances need to be to ensure that any development was appropriate and led to an overall increase in biodiversity? Is it possible, I suppose? That's what I'm asking.
Yeah, I think, and just to follow Richard's point before, it's so very site-specific and contextual. You know, so one green belt might be biodiverse rich for a certain area or certain species, and another one biodiverse rich for another one. And the point about national legislation and biodiversity net gain, it will only ever go so far. And it's really about making sure that local plans really embrace the biodiversity net gain and make it very specific and very local. So I think you're right. I think in some situations it might be possible. I do think we need to revisit that whole conversation to start with before we start saying, oh, biodiversity net gain will take care of any development on Greenbelt. But even if there is a conversation about developing on Greenbelt and thinking about the application of biodiversity net gain from that, biodiversity net gain only works when it's really truly embraced by the local plan, because then you get that locally specific biodiversity and the locally specific nature. Otherwise, it will just become a 10% B&G based on a metric, and that won't deliver much of anything. So I think before we get to that conversation, there's a lot that we've just heard about to get there. If we do get to that conversation, we're thinking about biodiversity net gain, yes, if it's truly localised in the local plan. So you get very specific. I've seen some amazing local plans that are really specific about how biodiversity net gain should be locally in that particular location.
If Richard, whether you had anything else to add?
Well, I sound like a bit of a broken record on one thing about getting the right data, but it's the part of the mitigation hierarchy which is assess. That should be the very first step. And the second step in that hierarchy is to avoid if it can be done elsewhere. And that, I think, is a point that Alice has made in the past frequently about whether that delivery can be elsewhere. And then you do get onto the various things about the mitigation and offset through biodiversity net gain. And I would reiterate that not every London borough, including some with huge amounts of greenbelt, have that. I could share some sort of freedom of information questions I asked of one particular local borough, Outer London Borough, about their policies. They don't have any policies to suit BNG. They haven't issued any guidance on off-site gains. They don't have a habitat bank of sites, but they realise they should explore this, and they're not aware of any BNG assessments that have been triggered. So it's difficult when you don't have, I think as a point made earlier, you don't have the ecological expertise to make those assessments within the planning department.
Thank you. And Alice, I'm going to come to you. And when you answer, because I represent Enfield, so obviously we've got the local plan there has identified 2 sites that, with the changes in the national planning, I think we expect that there may be some change there. So again, if that were to go to head, what would be needed to make sure that we didn't lose nature and we actually increased biodiversity and access to open spaces?
Well, I think there are a number of things to be said here, aren't there? I mean, if a site is for agriculture or for playing fields, then is it appropriate that we're talking about nature? Yes, maybe a bit around the edges, or yes, maybe it could be improved, but actually it's still providing a service, and that might be an ecosystem service. It might be a human service like providing food. It might be for recreation. It might be a site which is habitat, in which case you would lose a lot, wouldn't you? So there's more though, isn't there? If you build, you're introducing new kinds of pollution. You're introducing light pollution, for example. And I noticed BugLife have just launched something called Don't Neglect the Night, whereas we continually forget about, in London and in planning, too often light pollution is just ignored completely, despite having a gigantic impact on wildlife. You introduce road runoff pollution, which of course, we're struggling to tackle anyway. Road runoff, water straight into the soil or into the watercourses. And you're digging up a perfectly good bit of land and all the soil and all the biodiversity that may be in that already. So I have real difficulty in believing that you can gain biodiversity, you can do biodiversity net gain by taking a greenfield site. And would really struggle to believe that that's the case when you've got something like London. Certainly not within the next 10 years, and I would say 20 years. We shouldn't really need to be thinking about it at all.
Thank you. Can I just ask as well, I think you came to a committee a couple of years ago, and at that stage you were wanting and promoting 10 new parks for London. And I'm just wondering, is that something you're still campaigning for? And is something like that then even more important if we are taking away some of our greenbelt development?
Well, yeah, I mean, that is relevant in some. So one of those sites is up the River Roding. One of them is Metropolitan Open Land. It's owned by Berkeley Homes, who, of course, are, better than some, I guess, if you want to look at it that way. We met them on site. They talked about it potentially being contaminated. I can tell you that it's in an area of a need for open space. There's, an area of deficiency. It's a very deprived area, the east edge of Newham, and yet it's fenced off, completely fenced off. And yes, that site should be brought back in, but brought back into use. As long as Berkeley Homes have it, that might happen, but will it happen in 5 years? Will it happen in 10 years? We don't know. But of course, now the threat is that, in fact, it might be termed grey belt, and therefore, decided that somehow that's more important. So again, it's not just about biodiversity from our point of view, although that site probably does have a huge amount on it, if anybody had a record of it. We don't know if there is.
Okay, thank you. I think Elliot quickly wanted to come in. Yeah.
So just a quick point from my previous experience, where I was the biodiversity officer for an outer London borough, which for most of the South of our borough was Greenbelt. Recognising the fact that the Greenbelt designation itself doesn't really acknowledge nature in the designation, it was incredibly important for ecological connectivity with outer London borough, in this case Surrey. So I think one thing to really think about is how the local nature recovery strategy comes into this, and cross-county working. And that was mentioned earlier by Jeff, the Lawton principles of bigger, better and more connected are fundamentally important. So I think one of the biggest benefits that the Greenbelt does serve is that ecological connectivity to neighbouring counties, and something that I don't think we've dwelled too much on just yet, so I really wanted to reiterate that point.
That's important. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. So we're going to move on to Assemblymember Mahfouz.
Thank you, Chair, and you've obviously already outed me as a big fan of beavers. Thank you, Elliot, for showing me around at Paradise Fields earlier this year, and I absolutely used to love the space beforehand, but since the beavers have come in, they've just absolutely transformed that space beyond recognition, which is just amazing. Now, just going back to the point, Alice, actually, that you so my colleague was just raising about new parks, and you talked about golf courses earlier, but actually in Ealing what has happened is a former low use golf course has been turned into a park. So as part of ambitious plans to introduce a regional park that runs through the heart of the borough, that is an opportunity there, isn't it, in terms of, sort of looking at some of the sites such as golf courses, in terms of making sure that we improve biodiversity across our city.
I actually met with the golf people last week, and they said that those are the golf courses which are the most accessible, although actually we did a bit of an analysis there and then about accessibility in golf, and actually you can play for reasonable cost if you compare it to something like tennis in a park. I mean, again, it's not my job to kind of decide whether golf is over provision, but I would say that removing courses like White Webbs Park and the Ealing Park, which would have been accessible to local people, means that that's now no longer accessible to them. But that's not, my decision to decide where we need golf or not. yeah, that site is also doing an incredibly important job in relation to water management, as far as I understand as well. So it's incredibly important.
I'm talking about Pear Tree Park, which used to be the Paravel Golf Course, and obviously, having lived close by to that's now more open to far more people than it was when it was a golf course, in terms of sort of being able to use that site, but also in terms of improving the biodiversity. Now, in terms of sort of going on to, I was going to be asking how well you felt compulsory biodiversity net gain was working, but I think I can hear echoes of what your answers would be. So I guess in terms of the question, and I'll start with Alice and then go to Simone, is how well you feel it's effective in conjunction with the urban greening factor, and how you feel the sort of duplication between the two is impacting on its effectiveness.
Sorry, did you mean Julia?
Oh, sorry, Julia. Yeah, sorry.
Just to say that I think the Ealing Park is actually a really, really good example, because one of the challenges that even if we have all these biodiversity net gain for developers and we have all the site surveys, is the enforcement afterwards. We've talked about the lack of capacity within LPAs to monitor that. So there is a really interesting discussion about looking at biodiversity net gain and, of course, thinking what we can do on site. But the reality is that does need a level of enforcement over that 30 years versus funding a strategic regional park, which would be in the really good hands of someone. So I think there's a really interesting and important discussion to get that balance right. It's not one or the other, it's a mixture of both. What I would say about B&G and urban greening factor, so B&G is never the silver bullet. It's meant to be part of a mix. And there's gaps in biodiversity net gain if you look at the ultimate goal of nature's recovery and enhancement, because it is a net gain, so it's a process. The metric is one of the best out there. It's been taken up by America, Canada, across Europe, but it's quite a blunt tool. And what the urban greening factor does is that it comes in with a lovely, and this is what else we need for nature. So it's a really interesting policy mix in terms of really looking comprehensively at that. There can be practical challenges when you have two different policies and then, that kind of coming together. Again, it comes back to that mix of, can we have one consolidated strategy, which is about development truly supporting nature recovery and enhancement, rather than let's do development and then some net gain and hope it all mixes and some urban greening factor. Because if, we're trying to put a jigsaw puzzle together that no one's told us what the picture is, So I think it's certainly a great example of how comprehensive strategy could work, but I think we still haven't got it right. It's not development then some net gain. It's if development is truly restoring and driving nature's recovery, what would that look like?
So if I first just add one thing to Julia's point, it's that I agree it's missing a few things, but the one key thing I've found that it's missing, that I've now asked our planning officers to add to the local plan as a little extract, is it has no sort of reference to what I call habitat incidentals. I don't know if that's the correct word for it, but it's things like log piles and bug hotels, really small, simple things that you can add to a development, especially in an inner city borough, that will have a big impact. For example, we have the priority species stag beetle in the borough. We're really trying to get them to spread, and having log piles sort of join up different spaces could potentially see that. But otherwise, to get back to your question, in my own experience, so I don't know if this is representative of the rest of London, I found that they work incredibly well together for two main reasons. So one of them is, particularly for an inner city borough, we do get sites that are exempt from B&G, and they can be quite major sites because they are being built on a development that is already all sealed surfaces, so they have no habitat on site. They are the de minimis exemption. So UGF is then the only other policy that allows us to have a measurable gain of nature on these sites. So that's really key. But then also I find, like Julia said, they measure it very differently. So while B&G is looking at the net gain, urban greening factor is looking at the whole site. You know, is there a good amount of the area of land that's contributing to greening? So I think they do really complement each other, but perhaps for a UGF, now that the local plan is being revised, maybe it could be slightly considered how it can enhance biodiversity rather than just looking at area. Yeah, thank you.
And thank you for that. And sticking with both of you, in terms of, at the moment, obviously the target is set at 10% within the London plan. Do you feel we should be more ambitious in terms of that target, and also anything else that we could be factoring into the BNG that isn't currently in that metric? You've touched on that part a little bit already.
So at Hammersmith and Fulham, we're currently updating our local plan, and we are building the evidence base to possibly increase BNG to 15 or 20%. But I think it really does need to be led by the evidence. BNG is still only just over a year old. We've not actually had that many planning applications that are eligible for BNG, so the evidence is quite small. But I would recommend that evidence is gathered for the GLA across London and see if that is something that should be looked into. I definitely would encourage it. I think it's good to be ambitious. One thing I am considering is I've noticed our major applications tend to achieve the 10% very easily and go above and beyond. I mean, we've had an application that's achieved 938%, and others which are like 40%. Yeah, they quite a few major applications really are just smashing it out of the park. Whereas I think small sites are struggling a little bit more. They're still definitely achieving the 10% and definitely can achieve the 10%, but I think they would struggle more to achieve a higher BNG score. So maybe there is feasibility for small sites to remain at 10% if they're not gotten rid of, and major sites to increase to 15 or 20%.
I think firstly, clearly linking it to local nature recovery strategies. While there is that point in the metric, you can really cement it in policy. So biodiversity net gain should be really locally meaningful for nature and for people, and clearly linking it to local nature recovery strategies. A high percentage, we really welcome that if you match it with delivery. So there was a development in Camden who bought habitat units from a site near Exeter because there was just no one local. So we have to equally support and make sure that we're getting these biodiversity gain sites on the register. It can cost 15, 20k by the time, this local wildlife trust, they need legal agreements, they need their own biodiversity metric. So there are so many economic and social barriers to get on to access the BNG markets. And if people just put up the percentages, it is very welcome, especially when we can achieve it, but not if we're going to then buy habitat units, much as Exeter's lovely, but I think London needs its own sites.
Thank you. Simone, you touched upon actually in terms of potentially the government looking at removing small sites from BNG in total, but actually, what we've seen is obviously it's a very recent policy, as you've mentioned. It was only introduced last year, but actually minor sites have overall declined by 11% over the last decade or so. So actually, clearly not impacting on the ability for small sites to come forward. What more can we say really to sort of show that actually BNG is not the thing that's holding back small sites coming forward?
So in my experience, in Hammersmith and Fulham, whether it's small sites or major sites, it's really clear that planning applications and proposals that consider biodiversity net gain from the start of their development, they easily achieve BNG. And I think that might be the case with small sites where you aren't required to have an ecological consultant fill out the small sites metric. And I think, I'm not sure, but I think what this is having an impact on is the landscape architects coming up with a plan and then doing the BNG metric. It then gets sent to me, I take a look at it, I go through it, I play around with it when they're not achieving 10%, and I can very easily see, oh, you just need to plant one more tree on your small site, and you get that 10%, and they achieve that. So I think it's clear to me that it's not B&G holding them back. I think maybe they do need a bit more guidance, but yeah.
Yeah, just really quickly, I mean, I suppose there's the obvious problem of percentage gain, isn't there? Which is why UGF would be important. If percentage gain, if you're on a completely sealed site and it's very large, then 900% is potentially 900% of nothing. The other point is that we will be asking for something whereby councils would, for example, if you are asking for permission for extension for your house, small works that would be conditional upon you depaving your front garden or regreening to an extent, something like that. So actually, I think there's probably opportunities there too.
Great. And did anybody else want us to come in on that one? No. Sorry, probably just quickly, and apologies, Simone. Another one, quick one at you. So, last year or the year before, actually, Leonie Cooper, as chair of the committee, had pulled together a report. One of the recommendations was to create an independent body of approved consultants and ecologists to support local authorities in the implementation of B&G and nature enhancement more widely. How important is that, given some of the comments you've already made earlier?
I'm not quite sure how important that would be.
I guess because you spoke earlier about the lack of resources, competencies within local authorities to be able to deliver against. I know, Richard, I saw your hand pop up.
Well, it's more I was going to mention there is the Chartered Institute of Ecology and Environmental Management. They have a register of ecologists. I'm in there. I'm not on the professional register because I'm not a private consultant in that way. You'll SIEM, I think several others on the. I'm not sure if they're in SIEM, but there is that out there. So there is a registration already of professional consultants. Whether they, what they should state is whether they deal with B&G as well.
Just to say, I think it does echo the point in some LPAs who don't have an ecologist. That's absolutely essential. We've run biodiversity net gain training for LPAs with no ecologists, and we get to a point when they're like, well, we don't have an ecologist. And, that's like half an hour into a full days of training. Well, this is about biodiversity net gain. So I think B&G can really work when it's made locally specific for that local nature content linked to local nature recovery strategy. There's a lot more support for LPAs in that respect. There's the enforcement as well, to keep coming back to is that on that site as well with that. But yes, to enhance that capacity with local planning authorities is essential.
Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you. I'm going to move straight on to Assemblymember Prince.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon. This really is for Richard and Julia, and I think if it's okay with you, Richard, I might start with Julia because I think you touched on it when answering one of the previous questions. The government is consulting on changes to the Planning and Infrastructure Bill that could remove the obligation to mitigate impacts on site. And instead of paying compensation, instead people will be paying compensation through an environmental delivery plan. What are your views on this, and is it likely to be widely used in London, do you think?
It's an interesting question that way. I think the first of all, there's the intention that development and nature will be a win-win. So the intention and to have even nature restoration in the government rhetoric about development is welcome. I think there's been enough looking at truly the environmental delivery plans and the Nature Restoration Fund. The thing is, it really has a place to work. But I think as a general blanket solution, there's been concerns about whether that would lead to, like you say, a regression of environmental laws, whether that would deliver the true win-win outcomes. But most importantly, I think we would not achieve the development we need to achieve because of all the reasons we've talked about. Nature isn't a nice to have. Nature's essential. It's essential to people's well-being. It's essential to our resilience under climate change. It's essential to our economy and growth. And so the way that we think about development and nature, the win-win, is very, very welcome. And it has the potential to work. But I think us working in the profession have so many ideas about how it can truly work that we're hoping to have more of a say in terms of that collaboration piece as it comes into that approach. Now, what we've heard is that the first starting point would be nutrient neutrality, and I think there's a very welcome stage to really think about nutrient neutrality and how that could work with the Nature Restoration Fund. But again, you know, achieving the better outcomes for that. And we see that it could work with some key amendments, and it's whether those will be taken on board for the right stage.
Thank you. Richard.
Yes, certainly coming on to the issue of amendments, I've been working closely with my colleagues in wildlife trusts across the country and the Wildlife Trust central body. And unfortunately, I don't share the, sort of the potential enthusiasm. I think none of the amendments that were put forward in the committee, the Bill Committee, or the debate on Monday were accepted. And we don't think as a movement, and it's backed up by the Woodland Trust and RSPB, we don't think that the environmental delivery plans will deliver for biodiversity. As even an MP said it to me, it's an unspecified improvement at some time in the future, somewhere, because there's not that much commitment, whereas at least with BNG you have a conservation covenant, you have a time scale, and you have a delivery plan and monitoring periods at which to meet that. So it seems to be a retrograde step compared to BNG. Some of the habitat replacement solutions are also a bit flawed, or the suggestions. So loss of open mosaic habitat can't be replaced by green roofs and walls. I don't think that's right. The BNG is quite good at making sure there's a like for like replacements. And in terms of, Julia might know more about the BNG changes for small sites, but I'm concerned that it could create a tiered system that could be abused by lotting of sites. You're making a large site, putting in smaller applications, smaller sites, so it gets through in a different tier to which perhaps it should be considered. So that's one of the flaws with the changes to BNG. I mean, our overall conclusion is that the part 3 of the Planning and Environment Bill should be dropped.
I was going to come to that.
All right, sorry.
But Elliot, did you want to...
It was just to sort of reiterate the point around Part 3 being paused, I think, and also the challenging situation that this puts Natural England in, who will be sort of overseeing it, while also being funded through the Nature Levy. So, you know, there's a clear conflict potentially there. I think there are good, and also that the viability-based levies, you know, will always put development in favour of nature. So I think there's some real concerns with this from my perspective. There are other licensing systems out there that do seem to work very well, particularly the Great Crested Newt district level licensing. I think that's a good way of having a broader sort of brush approach to things like this. But yeah, just something to...
Okay, so I mean, I'm getting the feeling that you're not that in love with Part 3 of the bill. Do you think the Mayor should comment on that? Do you think the Mayor should have something to say on Part 3?
Well, I think particularly with London and the comments other people have mentioned earlier about London's taken a lead on things. It was the first place to have the local wildlife site systems that the UK, or that England uses, first started in London. So there's a lot of things that should start in London, and I do think the Mayor should comment on that. I think I don't see that there are too many flaws with Part 3. The amendments that have been suggested haven't been carried, and so a lot of colleagues in the green sector have suggested that it ought to be paused.
I'm going to finish there unless anyone else wanted to have a quick comment on that. No? All right. Well, thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you. We're very slightly over the time, but I think that's been a really important and valuable discussion, and I'd like to thank all of our guests for coming in today and contributing in this first section of our meeting. That's been incredibly helpful. I'm now going to pause the meeting for a section so that we can, we've got some further guests to come in, including the Deputy Mayor for Planning, but thank you all very much for your contribution. Welcome back to today's Environment Committee. Now we're going to move on with our discussion on the London Plan and nature, and we've got a new panel with more guests for the second panel. Thank you very much for joining us. We have Abby Chrysostomou, who is the Head of Green Infrastructure at the GLA, the Greater London Authority. We have Graham Horton, who is the Acting Deputy Director, Thames Solent Area team for Natural England. You're very welcome. We have Jules Pipe, who is the Deputy Mayor for Planning, Regeneration and the Fire Service. And last but not least, we have Lucinda Turner, who is the Assistant Director, Planning and Regeneration at the Greater London Authority. Thank you very much for joining us, and sorry we're starting very slightly after when we had hoped to start this second panel. I'm going to start with Jules, who I think may want to make some remarks to begin with. Or not? Yes, definitely microphone.
Yes, that will be a good start. Yes, happy to make some opening remarks, Chair. Thank you very much. I mean, obviously, as you know, the context we're working in is the next London Plan's coming forward with the task set for it by the government of identifying land for 10 years supply of 880,000 homes over that 10-year period. London hasn't come close to delivering at that rate since the 1930s, when there was a major expansion of London's built area. There were other things going for it at the time as well, significant growth in the transport network, low interest rates, lots of other things that made it a bit easier back then, but it still required an expansion in London's built form. So towards the new London Plan was the consultation document. It sets the direction of travel for the next plan. Specifically, it raises the questions about where that growth will go, as well as the form that it should take. And obviously, it's going to give us an opportunity for all of us to understand. I think we're all both meant to be somewhere else now. It will allow us to understand where that's going to growth is going to go and the form that it should take. And it will allow us to obviously gather views on that, and crucially evidence and data that will allow us to set policy based on data rather than simply views. The document doesn't contain proposals. It's too early in the plan process to do that. It sets out some ways forward that are mutually exclusive. It sets out either-ors, and it's asking open questions to people as to what they think. Part of that, obviously, is about the green belt and whether it's people's views on using that to help address the housing crisis. But at the same time, seeking to achieve enhancements to nature at the same time. I want to reassure the committee that we're absolutely committed still to a brownfield-first approach. We would obviously want to explore through a future plan as to what safeguards can be put in place to encourage that approach. I use the word encourage advisably because actually even today, under today's current London Plan, which is very protective of MOL and the Greenbelt, it's still possible that Greenbelt applications comes forward, and it's still possible that Greenbelt applications get permitted even under the previous national legislation and current London Plan legislation. So whatever safeguards we put in to encourage a brownfield first approach, that isn't, we're never going to be in a position, as we are not today, to say you can only use Greenbelt when all brownfield has been exhausted. That's simply not realistic in the way that planning law and planning decisions are taken. I should say that, because I'm sure we'll get onto it, but I'd just like to finish by saying that what this question raises about Greenbelt is not driven by an attempt to address viability and affordability, because it won't. Any amount of expansion of numbers of building, realistic numbers of building, and I include even 880,000 over 10 years in terms of realistic, just for a point of debate, it's not going to have a material effect on reducing house prices. At best, it's thought it might suppress the rate of increase over that 10 years. But that's not the exam question that's set. The exam question is simply, if you were to build 880,000 homes, where will they go? How could you fit that into a city in the best way possible? And that is what the Greenbelt issue is involved in. So I don't think it's useful to go down a cul-de-sac of how it might bring forward housing right now, how it would reduce the cost of housing when I don't think it would, etc. It's purely this exercise about identifying the physical space for 880,000 homes once one has, on paper, exhausted all the brownfield sites and sweating them as much as is reasonably possible, because although sometimes we might slip and say maximum, what we mean is optimise. It's basically the best amount of, the most efficient amount of housing to be developed in a particular area. And I think probably at that point I should hand over to you all to ask questions.
Luckily, our predominant concerns are not really to do with rising prices, lowering prices or maintaining house prices. We are the Environment Committee, so we are very focused on the environmental aspects. We'll leave that to the Planning and Regen and the Housing Committees to look at those elements. So do you think it would be fair to say, bearing in mind what you've just been alluding to, that it's the changes to the national planning policy framework that are having the impact on the Towards a London Plan options?
I think that we would be still asking this same question, even if the NPPF hadn't changed and the supporting legislation, and we were still able to produce our own SMARF for the purposes of determining the overall number. Because if I take us back to 2017 and 18, 19, when we were working on the previous London Plan and then published the draft, we weren't able to identify enough land for the 660,000 homes that was determined to be the need figure then. We were only able to find 520,000. And obviously since then, several hundred thousand have actually been built out. So on the back of an envelope, not the basis on which we will set the final figure, but just at this point in time, before the call for sites, before the SHLAR process has ended and we can identify the maximum amount of brownfield sites that are available, before we get to that point, on a best estimate, looking back to what happened then, it would suggest that we would run out of land this time as well. And of course, the figure has raised, as you're kind of alluding to, the government. So it may have made the requirement higher, but it hasn't created the need to look elsewhere than brownfield sites.
Okay, so we've heard the new terminology of the grey belt being bandied around quite a lot. And in fact, actually, we've just been talking about the wild belt this morning, earlier on in the meeting as well. Not this morning. How do you think, should we have a new definition in planning terms of grey belt? I mean, is that actually going to be a thing, or is it just a terminology that people are using? And do you think that's going to affect the parts of the green belt that are developed out? I mean, how's that going to work? Are we actually going to have bits of the green belt that suddenly have a new planning designation, or is it just going to be vague?
Well, it's not going to be vague. I mean, it would probably be good to hear from Lucinda, actually, to balance what I think are kind of two things in a way. Yes, we hear a lot about this grey belt idea, and it's been used as a useful way of describing, those less well-loved areas of green belt that may be suitable. And so perhaps it's been useful in an illustrative way. But for us, we've embarked on a green belt review, which is about identifying, and it will cover all the 18 boroughs with Greenbelt in London, and it's about identifying those areas of Greenbelt. Well, it will identify poorer performing areas of Greenbelt by virtue of assessing all areas of Greenbelt and how they perform against the purposes for which Greenbelt was created in the first place. So one could say, I suppose, that is a process of, a method of and framework for identifying those areas that could be described as grey belt. But I have, to be honest, lost track quite of where we are with the government's definition and how much we are actually using it. I mean, it's not a term that I tend to use at the moment. It is designated green belt. We are in the process of assessing all green belt as to how well it performs. If further down the road, we kind of formalise that as formalise the definition of bits that fall below a bar as grey belt, I'll leave it to Lucinda to kind of share with perhaps what the next thinking for the next steps are.
So it sounds as though you're sort of tending more towards the areas that are not unsuitable for development, but perhaps you could unpack this green belt versus grey belt and whether that is actually a designation that is a thing and is it a useful thing. And Jules, I'm going to ask you to turn your microphone off.
Sorry.
I shall try. It's quite a complicated context. So the government has set out particular kind of methodologies for green belt reviews. That is to assess the green belt, existing green belt, against the purposes of the green belt with an aim to identify what they would classify as grey belt as well. So we would, an output from the strategic green belt review will be our kind of take on what would qualify under the kind of government definitions as grey belt. There are some preclusions to that, or kind of a basis on which you only identify it as provisional, relating to environmental designations, so things like flood risk, etc. So it's quite a complicated process. I think what we would say is that is only one factor. The Strategic Green Belt Review is a technical exercise, kind of set out under the NPPF kind of and central government guidance. There are a lot of other layers and considerations in this before we get anywhere near to advocating for the release of particular kind of areas of green belt. One factor in that is the accessibility and connectivity of locations, because we are clear that any development needs to be linked to public transport so that it is sustainable and so that we can optimise densities so that we can minimise any take of green belt kind of land. Grey belt sites may be more disparate, they may be more discrete, they may not be particularly well located, so they may not actually be particularly suitable for sustainable housing development that kind of we need to see. So kind of it may be that there are other locations that are deemed more appropriate in that context. There are also, of course, the environmental considerations and the linkage with the London Nature Recovery Strategy, which is being prepared, and other kind of environmental kind of factors. And so there are lots of layers to get to before we kind of could identify if we do need to release Greenbelt, if we can't meet our need through brownfield sites that we are identifying through the Land for London process. That is our first port of call. If we can't, there are a lot of layers and a lot of assessments and a lot of evidence still to piece together before we can identify what are the most appropriate locations.
You just referred then to this pan-London Greenbelt review across the 18 boroughs that have bits of the Greenbelt in them, and obviously quite a lot of the Greenbelt is in the in particular boroughs. There's 2 or 3 boroughs with about 40, almost 50% of London's Greenbelt just in those 3 boroughs, I think. Could you give us a sort of timescale for? I mean, you've talked a lot about the complexities of this review, and we've also spoken to Abby about the complexities of the London Nature Recovery Strategy and the Green Infrastructure Framework. Have you got a sort of timescale for when the process of assessing the greenness of the Greenbelt and other aspects of it is going to be completed?
As I say, the Strategic Greenbelt Review itself is one particular exercise, yes, and that's underway, and we would expect that concludes towards the end of this year. As I say, that is one kind of input, one kind of factor to consider in the broader assessment. There's the transport work, there's the linkage, as I said, with the LNRS, etc. But the strategic Greenbelt review itself, we would expect to conclude this year.
And will that also include an assessment of the potential location for any new towns?
So that's all tied together with those layering that I talked about. So there's already been some discussions, as you're probably aware, through the Enfield EIP on their kind of proposals and their proposal for a new town. There are other ongoing kind of discussions with boroughs on that basis, because clearly, if we are talking about anything of the scale of new towns, 10,000 homes or more, we need them to be in locations that are already well served by public transport or could feasibly be done so, because otherwise we will end up kind of with low density car dependent development, which increases the take of any land. It doesn't make best use of the land that we've got. And it's also
going to come back to the transport connection item in a minute, but I just want to take you back to the Mayor's talked a lot about both planting new trees, but has also talked about increasing canopy cover, something else we've talked a lot about with Abby. How would we ensure that the Mayor's goal for increasing canopy cover and urban greening aren't affected by building on green belt or green field sites within the London boundary?
The Mayor has absolutely made clear that if he is to kind of accept release of Greenbelt, that it must be done in a particular way, which centres biodiversity, which centres improved access to green spaces, and which links to the achievements on kind of green canopy cover and others. So the consultation document has made clear his commitment to improving access to green space and improving kind of tree canopy cover. So in taking forward the assessments we're talking about and the kind of the potential for any new towns or other kind of development, it needs to kind of be absolutely integrally linked to the kind of the evidence base on the LNRS, the ambitions on tree canopy cover, etc. So we are working hand in hand with our environment colleagues and with boroughs on that.
And so just on this point then, because we've just been talking about biodiversity net gain and the London greening factor this morning, will any new developments that aren't on the brownfield sites that are in the green belt, will biodiversity net gain and the urban greening factor be applied to anything at all that is released at any point?
Yes.
Well, that's a very clear answer. Thank you. Did you want to come in as well, Abby?
I was just going to add, though, so I think that's completely true, and I think all the work towards meeting those goals still remains. I think there's some opportunity because, as we know, some of the greenbelt is not green, so there's opportunity for some of this development to actually increase tree canopy cover and green cover, and so I think that's something that we would really like to pursue. We actually are currently achieving our green cover target of 50%, but obviously that doesn't mean we've achieved it because we actually have to maintain it. And one of the key strategies for how we're working towards that is not just in the Greenbelt, actually, it's in inner London where we're really thinking about equity concerns and where the lack of tree canopy cover and green cover is. So the development that may or may not happen in the Greenbelt has to go hand in hand with targeted activities on streets and
we
things.
have looked at that before with our greening grey infrastructure and had TfL with us and talked a lot about greening of streets, and every time TfL dug up a street, they should put more rain gardens and trees in. Assemblymember Turrell has indicated you want to come in after me, and then I'm coming straight to Assemblymember Bakari.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to pick up something that Lucinda just said in answer to you about saying that we needed to build close to train stations because otherwise we get low density, more car-friendly homes. I take from that definition that what Lucinda means is family homes. So I wanted to ask the Deputy Mayor, is it now the policy of this administration not to build new family homes?
Sorry, I didn't quite understand the question because you said something about car-friendly.
I'm actually
homes.
not going to. I'm going to move straight on to Assemblymember Bakari because the issue of family homes or
Families who enjoy our local environment.
But that is actually not so much of an environmental issue. That's more of a definition of unit type issue. And I'm moving straight on to Assemblymember Bakari.
Also, sorry, Chair. Might I come back on that though? I mean, I think it is an environmental issue if the question isn't so much about size of unit, but actually whether it comes with a back garden, a front garden, and a driveway for 3 cars. Because then I do think it's an environmental issue, because if that's what people are building, that's going to take 5-10 times as much greenbelt space as if we were building an appropriate density around transport nodes. So if there is a transport node available or will be coming forward, one would expect a reasonable urban density around it, not 20 dwellings a hectare with back and front gardens. You know, I mean, I pointed this out to an Assembly member on the committee earlier this week, that, you can't say we're not going to build out, we're not going to build up, we're not going to build in backland sites because that's garden grabbing, and then also expect to be building homes with back gardens, front gardens, and parking for 3 cars. I mean, this is just imaginary fantasy planning, ruling out every place one could possibly build and then demanding the most land-hungry kind of development, which I think is an environmental issue, because the lower the density the buildings, the more green space will be lost.
I think that's I think there's a number of implications to that, not just environmental, is really the point I was trying to make. Assemblymember Bakari.
Thank you. I'm sorry about the deja vu, because you got me back again asking about the Greenbelt. I wanted to touch on something that you said in the planning meeting that actually was referred to by the representative that we had from Hammersmith Council earlier, and you were talking about the 18 boroughs that are going through the Green Belt Review. She flagged a concern to me about the lack of capacity and expertise within councils to be able to assess green belt, grey belt. All of these issues are a big concern, and there is an issue about funding and resourcing in councils right now. Are you able to tackle this within the review? Is this a concern that you're having, and how are you dealing with it?
Well, capacity across local authorities in all aspects of planning is a concern, and the more specialist the issue, the greater the dearth there is of expertise. On this particular issue, I mean, we have commissioned third parties to undertake the Greenbelt Review. Obviously, boroughs would be expected to engage in that, but we would expect them to have a certain degree of capacity to be able to engage in that, as they are expected to produce local plans, SPDs, and other functions. I mean, if they did truly lack the expertise, I mean, I'm probably Lucinda might have something to add on capacity that we can help them with.
Thank you. Yes, just a couple of additional thoughts on that. It definitely varies, the capacity and skills, access to skills across boroughs, and some are kind of lead the way and are fantastic and have access to those resources. Others don't. So partly that's why we kind of think a strategic review is right, so that we can facilitate the kind of expertise and access to that. But also we are looking at piloting something called Atlas London, which is trying to provide some additional capacity that boroughs can access where there are gaps, etc. So BNG and kind of ecological expertise and those other things have been identified as part of that. It's partly about planning skills per se, but we are also identifying other skills. So we do have some seed money from MHCLG to do that. We're putting that together, but this will be a key.
It's great that you're thinking ahead about this. Yeah, I mean I understand that there's a team working on the LNRS, closely working with the planning department in the re-evaluation of the London Green Belt. How are you involving the London boroughs for that re-evaluation, the Green Belt in London? Can you give us all the details about, firstly, the 18 boroughs that that you're working with, who you're working with within the boroughs, and that whole strategy of that re-evaluation with the London boroughs. Is that something that you can share with us as well?
Yeah, can I follow up with you on the kind of real detail on it, but just at the headlines? 16 of the boroughs are involved with us on the kind of steering group and in the work directly. 2 aren't. They decided they didn't want to be. We are still covering their boroughs. We are consulting the boroughs on kind of methodology, kind of assumptions, kind of how we take it forward, and we will keep kind of working with them hand in hand. And we'll continue to do so because, as I say, this is a relatively technical exercise, but we will obviously be engaging more widely with the boroughs on the other kind of layers and everything else I talked about. Linked to that too is the boroughs are directly involved. Every London borough across the city is involved in our Land for London programme and the SHLA process. Identifying their sites, kind of giving us information about capacities, kind of etc. So trying to work hand in hand with boroughs, but I can follow up on kind of further detail.
That would be great if we could have that detail, because I think there is concern, isn't there, that people like myself, I need to hear that detail, and there will be concern coming from council groups as well, and councillors and people having to be involved with these decisions. Now, once this re-evaluation is done and you've got all the information released, and let's say there is a disagreement between the GLA and London boroughs, how are you foreseeing to resolve those issues? Now, I say this because, and I know Jules is going to know what I'm going to be talking about, but there has been disagreements between councils and the GLA. Wimbledon Park, for example, is one classic example of where the mayor has gone against what a council and local residents have been saying about metropolitan open land in Wimbledon Park. Have you already thought about that process as well after the re-evaluation of the Greenbelt?
Apologies, I'm not clear on the question, or the first bit of the question.
So, how will you make sure that there are designated places that are protected from development that councils think should be protected by, but the mayor or the GLA may disagree on that? There may be disagreements between what needs to be protected.
Well, I mean, the process. I mean, Lucinda's probably best placed to answer, but I mean, the process will be. To actually designate places will be for boroughs to do so. They will be presented with their housing numbers, and there will obviously be the outcomes of the Greenbelt review, I should say, which I said earlier, considers the performance of Greenbelt. It doesn't choose or select in any way ones for release. It will be a matter for boroughs bringing forward their local plan and finding those numbers to determine which areas they would release.
Yeah, but there, as we've seen before, there have been disagreements between what you think needs to be protected and what councils or local groups think needs to be protected.
That would be heard through the EIP and whether, I mean, as I say, boroughs would have to demonstrate that they're meeting their housing need in the land they're identifying for development, and so the debate would come about if it was seen that they weren't making sufficient land available through their local plan, and they would be required to look again. I mean, I'm not a veteran of local plan processes.
Sorry to interrupt, but we are getting into the planning system rather than the environmental system.
Yeah, and but that there's an environmental aspect to this question. But I will go to the next one.
But we have got the issues in, the way that the planning system works, and if there are differences between what happens at local level and then at regional level, it is dealt with through the planning system. And there may be very special circumstances that the GLA might see that haven't been seen locally in a borough, which causes one outcome, or so on and so forth. So if we can come out of a discussion about the difference of opinion between local authorities and the regional authority, that would be lovely.
Okay, so the next question I have is on the Greenbelt developments that are being met to your housing need, London's housing need, which includes focusing on proximity to sustainable transport. Does this mean in practice, and how will it be assessed? Are you going to be focusing on areas that are accessible and easy to get to via easy transport links primarily first?
We'll both say something. I mean, it comes really back to the local plan, and a borough may it's just a complete sort of fictitious example, but it could be that there is it comes down to a choice between these, say, 10 hectares here that are relatively low grade but not well connected, versus only taking 1 to 2 hectares that are right bang next to a transport hub. And that it would be those kind of factors that a borough would weigh up. If they think that they could get a denser, more compact development next to a transport hub, or the alternative is something less dense that does not lend itself to. I mean, clearly, good placemaking would dictate the former rather than the latter, but that would be, and then TfL, for example, would have a view, GLA planners would have a view at the inspection about whether that was good placemaking or not. I mean, it's kind of almost infinite how the dial, the worst kind would be, 22 dwellings a hectare, strung out in the middle of nowhere, car-based, no school, no local facilities, and clearly that would, from a planner's and a placemaker's perspective, that would be ripe for criticism. Something more compact right next to. But the trouble is then, if the site right next to the railway station is a sink, for example, well then one has a problem, and then that's how that would have to be teased out through the plan making process. And now for a more technical answer, then we go to Lucinda.
No, that summed it up very well. I think it goes back to those layers I talked about, the environmental considerations, the sustainable location kind of factors, the outputs from the Greenbelt Strategic Review itself. There's a whole host of kind of factors that we need to weigh up, kind of, and that boroughs will need to weigh up. Our ideal is kind of compact, sustainable kind of developments that provide vital local services, are viable and kind of good places to live for people, that people can access jobs from, etc., and that deliver great new and improved parkland and improved biodiversity. I mean, there are core requirements that will be part of any kind of development, but other factors will kind of need to be assessed and
it's
considered
not just
in the round.
housing as well, it's commercial and industrial developments as well in the Greenbelt that's could be facing the same criteria. I know that in the planning meeting we were talking about how there could be developments, large industrial developments being built because of the need for, factories, etc., or whatever it is that you need. Even for building companies, to have the space that they need for new housing developments. So where are those developments going to be happening? Are they going to be happening near train stations or motorways? Has that been discussed, and how that impacts the environment? Because I'm sure lots of people love looking at the green fields as they go along M25. Will those things go because of this approach that we're having?
Again, I think I would go back to brownfield first. So we need to make the best use of strategic industrial land that is within London already. There are opportunities to intensify that and to use it better and to optimise it. There may be, we are positing quite a lot of questions in the consultation document to explore these issues and get evidence from kind of people responding and views and thoughts about what to weigh up. Some of the grey belt sites, the more kind of discrete sites, might be suitable for some industrial. Perhaps if that were to free up, sites within the London kind of existing London kind of urban extent that are close to train stations that might be better suited for housing. These are all questions we are seeking views on. We are positing kind of some thoughts, some potential options to explore, but we are keen to hear views as to where the balance lies.
Okay, I'm going to move on now from Assemblymember Bukhari. I'm going to come straight to Assemblymember Polanski, and if you want to do you're having the next question anyway.
Thank you, Chair. Jules, it's proposed that Metropolitan Open Land is going to have higher Metropolitan Open Land will have more protection than Greenbelt. Are you expecting more designations of Metropolitan Open Land than we have currently?
Sorry, am I expecting
more designations? Any more designations of Metropolitan Open Land?
Yeah, I would expect there would be. Yeah. I would imagine. Again, it's imaginary, but an area comes forward for release because of both the kind of golden thread that the government is expecting about improved nature, because of the ideas that we've talked about the improvement of part of the site and the restoring nature in part of the site. One would, it would be to be expected that would be ripe for designation as Metropolitan Open Land.
Thank you. Thanks, Chair.
And so that would be in the Greenbelt or otherwise?
Well, I suppose it would be former Greenbelt that had been de-designated and developed out, but because of the requirements for greening and nature restoration on part of the site, that part would be ripe for being made MOL.
Okay, thank you. Assemblymember McCartney.
Yep. Just quickly, I think it is relevant to this. You've talked about avoiding, if we build on the green belt, avoiding car-dependent areas. And in Outer London, a lot of Outer London is reliant on the railways, not the tube. So the metroisation becomes really important at this point. Did you get the sense with your discussions with government that they actually understand that and are prepared to put the funding behind that? Because what we don't want to do is to have, as you've talked before, about sprawling developments that are car dependent.
We are making that case very, very clearly. I have a dual role, and my other role is as Director of Spatial Planning for Transport for London. So we are absolutely joining up the kind of transport land use dimension. So rail metroisation is absolutely key, as you say. It can transform the connectivity and the access people have. So are they listening? I hope so. Kind of TfL has a longer term funding settlement after yesterday than it has had. But we have a lot of things that we want to do, and things like building the DLR to Thamesmead to unlock brownfield sites kind of there. So we are looking at that, and we are also working with Enfield to make the case kind of there.
Good, thank you. I'm now going to move on to the local nature recovery strategy and biodiversity net gain. Just firstly to the GLA, then I'll come to Graham if I can. But as far as the GLA is concerned, what are the highest priorities for nature recovery in London? And what is the process you've undertaken to select sites with strategic significance in the LNRS?
That's for me. Thanks for having us. I think it's really good timing, actually, that we've been able to develop the LNRS and our accompanying London Green Infrastructure Framework at the time that we're updating the London Plan. So I think it's a really good opportunity to try to, as the speaker said in the previous panels, to try to tackle a lot of these crises at the same time. But so for the LNRS, which is in draft form at the moment, we've identified a number of different priorities. So the LNRS overall is looking to take a different approach to tackling the ecological crisis, to be able to look at it at a strategic spatial scale across all of London. London is lucky that we actually had a lot of this information already compared to a lot of the other regions in England, but it wasn't necessarily spatial, it wasn't always up to date, it wasn't consistent across different boroughs. And so the LNRS has given us a chance to actually update it all and make it consistent across London. So part of that process was working with boroughs in particular, but also lots of other experts and Londoners to identify what are the key sort of habitat and species priorities across London. So the draft LNRS, and this is draft, so it could still change, but it has kind of 6 key overarching priorities. And those are for a bigger, better, more connected and more diverse nature across London. So that's both creating and improving sites and making them more mixed. There's a priority for people, and that's really about connecting people more with nature while also balancing the need for sensitive nature sites. There's a priority on species abundance, which is about increasing the number and abundance of species across London with a focus on the threatened species. There's a priority on invertebrates, especially terrestrial and aquatic invertebrates, including pollinators. We have a priority on soils and fungi, restoring and minimizing the disturbance to them. And then the 6th one is on invasive species and biosecurity, so we need to manage that and protect. And then in addition to those 6 overarching priorities, there's somewhere in the around 30-something individual priorities for specific species, and those are linked to spatial areas in the LNRS, and that has, that covers quite a long list that I won't read out entirely, but, rewilding, trees, waterways, grasslands, microhabitats, and sort of urban environments as well.
Thank you. And can I ask, how will the London Nature Recovery Strategy relate or contribute to the targets in the London Environment Strategy and the other GLA mandates through our new ways of working? Is this going to be embedded across? Because I suspect your strategy will be also affect other deputy mayors as well as Jules.
Yes, so the LNRS has those identified priorities per habitat. The targets that exist in the London Environment Strategy remain. They're kind of overarching ones, but these will be in addition to those. And yes, we expect that delivery against those targets will be across the GLA, but across all the boroughs and in many different sectors, whether that's highways delivering through development, through parks and things like that.
Wonderful. And then perhaps I'll start with Abby, then go to Graham if I can. Obviously, there's these strategies being developed across the country at the moment, and we heard in our last panel how important it was that our strategy just doesn't stop at the London border, and we have to have that cooperation with neighbouring counties. How are you doing that? And then if I can ask the same question to Graham about whether you've picked up areas that are doing things particularly well or how London might be different.
Yeah, we're working really, really closely with the neighbouring authorities, the regional authorities for this. My officers are sitting on regular meetings with them. We're sharing information, we're sharing tips. Some of the other neighbouring counties were slightly ahead of us in time, so we've gotten a lot of advice, especially on how to make the consultation really open and inclusive. And so part of the requirements, of course, is also to share all the different drafts across and to take on board recommendations and comments from the other counties. So we have already done the pre-consultation for the LNRS, and that has gone to the neighbouring counties and have received feedback in the same, so vice versa for the ones that have already progressed.
Thank you. Graham.
Yeah, good afternoon. Thank you for having me here today. So I've been involved in lots of different local nature recovery strategies across southern England. I think London has been a really interesting one because of the difference in comparison to the adjacent counties. Some of the things I think London has been doing particularly well is that collaboration that Abby's mentioned, and particularly thinking to this Greenbelt conversation that we've just been having, that need to look broadly beyond the boroughs and into those adjacent counties, mean that need for collaboration is going to be really important to delivering nature. So I think that probably sets London apart in that need. I think other counties have been a bit more inward looking at how do they fix local nature recovery strategies within their boundary. London, by the nature of it, has had to look to those adjacent counties more and thinking more strategically across the piece, which I think is vitally important. Nature doesn't recognise these boundaries. It's just looking for a place to recover, really. So I think London's been particularly good. I think the document is going to set out the best places to recover nature and the best actions that will do that. So this is a really important strategic document that sets out those best places. And what I think will be really important is how those boroughs and local authorities can come together to drive those actions forward to making sure that these places are getting more nature. I wouldn't pick a particular priority over any of those habitats and species. The job of the LNRS is already to do that, to make that refined list. What I would like to just see is more wildlife closer to people and in people's lives. And that's what the strategy should deal with.
Wonderful. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. I'm going to move straight on to Assemblymember Mahfouz.
Thank you, Chair. Graham, wanted to start with yourself. You talked about the work of local authorities, obviously the GLA, in terms of progressing the LNRS. What sort of insight do you feel, in terms, what have you seen really in terms of what potential support there is from government and appetite there is from government to provide funding to help progress this?
Thank you. So government has confirmed very recently that there'll be about £6.5 million to help that transition from the strategic planning stage, which Abby and her team have been working on so successfully, into the delivery phase. That will largely sort of take those existing mechanisms for pulling together the strategy and moving that into a delivery stage. I think that's really important. I think government really want to see these strategies in place by the end of this calendar year. We really want this network of plans across the country to be in place. But that's just phase one. The next important bit is getting on and delivering these actions and building momentum. So anything government can do to support it, it will do.
Thank you, Graham. And over to yourself, Abby, in terms of, we've talked about this before, but actually the GLA's funding approach, how's that going to be informed by the LNRS?
So there's a couple of things. So we have our own funding that comes from the Mayor, and we're soon to announce some new grant funding that we'll have available. And within that funding, similar to previous funds that we've had, like the Rewild London Fund, we will be funding projects that seek to deliver things that are in the LNRS. But the GLA and the Mayor only have so much money, and the LNRS is quite huge. There's so much that's needed, and we need to do things not just for the LNRS, but for other things like recreation. And so there's not enough money there. And so, as Graham has said, we've been funded so far to develop the actual LNRS, but in terms of delivery funding, that hasn't been confirmed. And we've been in conversations with Graham and his colleagues about the real need for that, because some of the mechanisms for funding that are identified by government for LNRS, including BNG and some of the environmental land management funding, isn't that relevant in London, and isn't going to be enough for delivery in London. So identifying specific funding for delivery in the LNRS coming from government would be really, really welcome.
Just to add to that, that's where also the linking up between London Plan and development proposals and LNRS is really important, because development can bring forward, kind of in the context of the urban greening factor, BNG, kind of etc., as part of the developments, as part of good placemaking. We heard in the last session about places like Kidbrooke and Woodbury Down. It can be integrally kind of brought forward also as part of that, so really kind of deliver win-wins there.
Thank you for bringing that up, Lucinda. And just before I move back to you, actually, just Abby, in terms of funding from other sources, I believe Thames Water, for example, has a fund that they make available for organisations to bid for. How important would it be for pots like that to be able to go into supporting this work?
I think we really expect any other funders and anybody sort of delivering for green space or nature in London to be using the LNRS to identify what the priority actions are, because it's there. We can tell you right away what the priorities are. So the key benefit of the LNRS is a coordinated approach across London for any funder, any land manager, anyone who's delivering. So we would expect them to use it.
Just sticking with that particular point, and obviously, clean and healthy water is a absolute priority for the Mayor, and we're looking to make sure that more of the GLA funds are directed to that. But obviously, as much funding as we can goes towards it. How is the LNRS going to inform the priorities of the Mayor's plan for clean and healthy rivers?
So it kind of goes both ways. So within the Clean and Healthy Waterways work that we have, we've got working groups, and there's one focused on biodiversity and ecology, and it's very much using the information from the LNRS to identify where the priorities are, alongside working with stakeholders. The LNRS has 8 of those sort of sub-priorities that are focused on restoration, expansion, creation, and connection of London's waterways. So there's quite a significant prioritization with the LNRS on waterways. And then the London Green Infrastructure Framework, which pulls together even wider amounts of information, has 3 strategic objectives. So it's access to blue space, clean water, as well as flood control, which isn't quite it's not about clean water, but it's linked. So it's kind of embedded throughout.
So those two there, the strategy and the infrastructure framework, how are they informing the London plan? Lucinda? Yeah.
So they will be key parts of the evidence base, and we're working hand in hand with the environment team as they are being developed.
And do you already know how you're going to ensure better access to green and blue spaces?
We have some ideas. The consultation document asks Londoners for other ideas and stakeholders as to how best we can integrate nature, kind of biodiversity and better green spaces into the document. One of the things we kind of posited in the consultation was the current London plan kind of focuses a lot on access to green spaces. That is important, but it does it in a kind of in a distance kind of way. We've asked in the document, could we integrate the kind of the demand on those spaces and the quality of those spaces in? So we are looking for Londoners' views.
Fantastic. And just very quickly, would you say that you've already started bringing together the synergies of the plan with the strategy?
Yeah, I mean, we're working together pretty much on a daily basis, trying to integrate with all the mapping and trying to understand really what the potential options are. I mean, we're still in early stages of the London plan development, so there's quite a lot of different options, and I think we're keen to hear how people respond to the consultation about what to take forward.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. I'm beginning to wonder whether it should be the London Green and Blue Infrastructure Framework, but that's a bit untidy to say, so I can see why you're sticking with just calling it the Green Infrastructure Framework. I'm going to move on to Assemblymember Polanski, who's going to pick up the next question.
Thank you. I think this is for you, Abby. You talked before about including Londoners in decision-making processes. What processes are there for Londoners to feed into these decisions to ensure that the existing value of green spaces is understood and able to be protected?
There's quite a lot of different angles you could take that. I mean, I think if we're talking about kind of identification of, public open space and land to be protected, people should really be working with their local councils to identify, local designations are done at the local plan level, so I think it's really important for people to be involved in that. There's also obviously designations for sites for importance for nature conservation, or SINCs. And we've commissioned some work to update guidance out there for how to help get SINC designation and also create a SINC resource hub. So really try to help make it easier for regular Londoners to access the information, to work with their councils to advocate for designation for certain sites.
Thank you. And if a Londoner is worried that a site is at risk, how can they best get its value mapped?
I don't know if Lucinda wants to answer that, but it is really about working with the local authority, because these decisions are made at the local plan level, and working with the local authority to identify those sites and identify what is the right designation is the key thing.
And is there any process of support if people feel like they're not getting what they need from the local authority?
There's quite a lot of information available out there from NGOs, groups like those that were on the panel earlier, CPRE and the London Wildlife Trust do, and many others do quite a lot of support to help local people access, and understand, because the planning system is quite complicated, but to understand how to identify and how to work with councils on that.
Finally, to come to you, Jules, is there anything you think you or the Mayor could be doing more to help people feel more engaged with the process, so it's not happening to them, but they're feeding in actively?
Well, not at the local level. When it actually comes to local plan making, I mean, you've heard from Abby, and that it's a local process, and we don't have resources to be able to fund support or groups in that way. Obviously, though, in the principle of the plan, there's opportunity for input there, and we're currently engaged, obviously, in a open process, currently out at consultation. And then, obviously, there's the second opportunity where both members of the public, but particularly also representative groups of amenity societies and so on, and green groups will be able to input to the consultation in the draft. And then also they'll be able to pitch for an opportunity to the inspector to be heard by the inspector and comment at the EIP.
Thank you. And just finally, because you said you don't have resources, and there's a bit of tautology there, because if you could call for resources or resources could be moved around. It often strikes me that it's very often volunteers that see this with protecting trees, for instance, where people are working really hard. Often it's a complicated planning process. Is there some kind of empowerment fund that could happen to communities or spaces to be able to inform or educate people who are trying to protect green space?
Well, I know that my section and the planning team don't have any spare resources to be able to do that, and I couldn't speak for other bits of the GLA because undoubtedly it would mean taking other bits of money away from other priorities within the GLA, and I couldn't speak to that.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. I'm going to move straight on to Assembly Member McCartney, who's going to pick up the next few questions.
Thank you. What evidence does the GLA collect about how biodiversity net gain and the urban greening factor are currently enforced and monitored effectively over time? I think that first to the GLA if I can.
Yeah, we don't have much at the moment. I mean, BNG is relatively new. Urban greening factor, we are doing some work as part of the evidence base for this London plan to try to get more information about how it is being kind of applied and used. But the data we have so far show that most developments are meeting the 0.4 for the residential developments and the 0.3 requirement for commercial, but we are looking to expand that kind of our understanding of how it's been applied. As Jules just said, the enforcement and monitoring is at the local level, and I have to say things are tight. It goes back to the previous kind of discussion on ecological resource. Local planning authorities are very stretched, some of them particularly so. And enforcement and monitoring is something that often suffers in that. So we are making the case strongly to central government, and the Mayor continues to make the case alongside London councils for proper resourcing to be able to do the job of monitoring enforcement and kind of what the local planning authorities need to do.
And I just add that that's across the piece, because it's not that this is a new additional thing that, oh dear, it lacks capacity. All planning requirements are enforced by the local authority, not the GLA. The GLA doesn't have that capacity, never has had that capacity to be able to get involved. It's meant to engage at strategic levels. It sets the frameworks that others engage with. But we don't have the capacity, and never have been structured to have the capacity to replace or add to the local authority role of enforcement of planning conditions.
Thank you. And my final question is, in the previous panel, you may have heard this, they talked about offsetting and often having to, if you feel like, offset to other parts of the country. We heard about lots of offsetting credits going down to Exeter, for example. Is there a role for the GLA to come up with a scheme or something so that we could perhaps amalgamate sites across London so that we can keep that offsetting, preferably in borough, but if not, at least in the city?
I mean, I'd certainly be sympathetic to that where it could not be delivered on site, but we're clear that, particularly on where we started this conversation today about the release of Greenbelt sites, we would absolutely be seeking that it was done on site. That's effectively the quid pro quo for the release. The fact that there is real, genuine nature recovery and investment in green space on that site.
I think that's the kind of input that would be really good to hear through the consultation that we're doing, and how that might work, because we're looking at something along those lines for apprenticeships and the requirements through Section 106 to support kind of employment and apprenticeships, because you find difficulties hosting them just in a single borough where it kind of so it's a really interesting kind of idea.
Thank you.
Obviously, there are many sites that come forward that are nothing to do with green field sites at all, and those are the ones that usually the building occupies the whole red line, and then there isn't the space, whether it's to do outside play, whether it's greening, whether it's and so and then as Lucinda said, this goes right across the piece, even to the Section 106 requirement for apprenticeships. So we need to be more creative in having some sort of clearinghouse process that sort of aggregates these small contributions that sites make to actually then make a meaningful impact. You know, again, it goes like affordable workspace is another great example where often it's dissipated or the impact is dissipated by actually having it concentrated, whereas hoovering up small bits and then actually making a bigger impact with a specific purpose-built 100% but affordable place is better.
I'll just add as well, so from a policy perspective, local plans have the opportunity to identify where offset credits can go. So the kind of default is the national character area, which is part of why credits may go outside of London, but we're looking into, for the London Plan update, identifying the London boundary and a prioritization of, you know, this isn't agreed yet, but we're looking at whether there's even ring fencing around, like how many boroughs away you can be offsetting. So I think that's one of the things that we'd be interested to hear from people in the consultation is from a policy perspective, how we can identify where those offset credits should go.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I'm going to move straight on to Assembly Member Prince, who's going to take the next question.
Thank you, Chair. My question sort of leads on from what you were talking about in regards to the Planning and Infrastructure Bill. And there seems to be some worries about Part 3 of the bill. I'm not sure if you're familiar. I'm sure you are actually, Jules. Yeah, well, you know your brief. And the worry around that seems to be giving developers the ability to buy out their legal obligation to nature. But it's interesting what you were saying about hoovering up the small sites, which kind of, because the bill will allow them just to put money into a pot, which is then used. So I'd really be interested in your views on that and how you think that will affect London, where you think it would affect London, and what you think the Mayor might want to do in order to lobby on this one.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose it goes through the all the policies with the plan that one wants to create mixed, balanced communities, for example, and so there is an element of direction and a degree to which one can enforce that. And I think we've discussed some examples already today where one is providing this guidance as strongly as you can, but at the end of the day, policies can't be gateway policies. We would be, as I say, we would be seeking to create, you know, if there was release, we would be seeking. Our intention is to have policies that are seeking sort of nature recovery and the establishment of greater biodiversity on a site being released. I think it's reasonable to be able to expect that we can get put those barriers, if they're to be barriers, hurdles, requirements in the plan. At the end of the day, wherever the national bill settles, though, a developer will always have the ability to appeal against a refusal by a borough based on our policy, or us refusing based on our policy. They would have the ability to appeal against a refusal to the inspector, and the inspector may choose to cleave to the national, whatever the national position is. Now, I know the national position is still to be determined. There's been a vote, I know, in the Commons that the majority went against the government, and I believe the Minister has committed to exploring further measures to implement, to give, to implement the wishes of the members, but hasn't necessarily conceded the methods, I think, that the MPs were suggesting.
I could probably add a little bit more on the environmental development plans itself. Well, to be honest, there's not a lot of information out there yet on the EDPs and how they work, and I'm not sure if Graham can share any more. But in the conversations we sort of had and what information is available publicly, it's potentially limited how the environmental development delivery plans will apply in London. The types of sites that they identify EDPs would apply to, there's not that many of them in London, and so because it's not clear kind of what the boundaries are for where the nature restoration funding would go from those EDPs, there's quite a lot of questions about how much this would benefit London, how much money would be available for London. Of course, we're still in ongoing conversations about trying to understand that better and making sure that, you know, London gets its fair share and gets, a good a role in the identification of how EDPs work. But I think there's still quite a lot of questions.
George, George, do you think there is merit in either yourself or preferably the Mayor lobbying the government to try and make Part 3 more advisory and therefore enabling us to actually define the sites where this may happen and enabling us to therefore have greater say and there being less recourse for developers to appeal?
I'm feeling a bit uncomfortable because it's outside my territory as to what the possibilities are on this. I'm looking to Lucinda and Abby really on the. I mean, not so much obviously the politics of the right and wrongs of it, but actually the technical ability of them to carve out.
I think there's still a lot of questions about how the EDP and Nature Restoration Fund actually will work, what the boundaries are, how you identify where the improvements are and when the improvements will happen. And so I think there's quite a lot of questions, but I think the key thing is that we want to make sure, and the Mayor wants to make sure, that London has say over how that money is spent and ensures that the nature in London is still protected, whatever happens with.
And I would say, sorry, what I would say though is we do have an opportunity to effectively do this without even asking, and testing it by actually our policies that we put in the plan and take to EIP. So we would be looking to give effect to what I was saying about having it on site, and then if the government wants to strike that out, then so we effectively do have the opportunity to carve ourselves out. But I come back to my point about the strength of that, because A, it could be knocked out at one post EIP when it's before the Secretary of State, but then also even if it's allowed to stay in at that point, it depends where the national picture lands, that they could always appeal above any refusal based on the London Plan policy.
So finally, are you or the Mayor, or is the Mayor going to lobby the government or write to the government to say what we think would be best for London, what the best outcome would be for London? Are we going to make suggestions as to how we would like to see it pan out rather than just wait and find out what we're left with?
I don't know what my environment colleagues and the DM for Environment are planning on this particular area. I mean, us as in the planning side of it, we're not proposing, we haven't engaged on it. But as I said, we will get our opportunity to draw our line at the when we're formulating policy later in the year.
There not be mileage in the Mayor or yourself actually writing to government saying, in an ideal world, this is how we would like it to work in London?
I think we've explored that, and I think what the Deputy Mayor is saying is that the best way to express it is to put it into the draft London plan. And then, if the government doesn't like it, they'll take it out. He's just going to say the same as he just said.
I agree with the Chair, because if we ask now and they tell us no, it would be a bit perverse then to put it in the plan.
Yeah. Okay, I'm going to draw that line of questioning, which is becoming slightly circular, to a close. the final question that we had was, what is the GLA's view about how Biodiversity Net Gain currently works on small sites, and are you submitting a response to the government's consultation on whether or not it should be removed as a requirement? I mean, it's quite astonishing to talk about removing it, because it only actually came in April of last year, so I would imagine it's quite hard to assess how well it's working on small sites. So removing it before it's even really had a chance to start doing anything seems perverse to me. But do we have a view on that, and are we lobbying about it?
So you're right that it is early days in terms of knowing the kind of impact. And as you say, they are consulting. I mean, what we will be doing is kind of obviously kind of liaising closely with the national level, looking at how it does work, what responses there are, what they do, and to ensure that our policy in the London plan, in the next London plan, kind of does what we need it to do within the London context, and ensure that the collective policies that we have deliver broader greening benefits in London. I mean, BNG, as we know, kind of is a relative kind of thing. It's 10% uplift. Actually, we have urban greening factor as well. They are complementary. They do slightly different things, but there are kind of synergies there. So we will be looking in the round at how we best deliver and protect kind of the greening kind of within the London context. We can follow up on you as kind of with you as to whether Environment Team and others are doing anything specific kind of on the consultation. We're kind of, my team's focus at the moment is how we make it work within the London plan.
Yeah, I think that's really what we would, from this side of the table, be keen to see. That's the end of our questions. Thank you very much for being with us as our second panel this afternoon. And I'd particularly like to thank the Deputy Mayor, because I know that you had other arrangements which you moved around to enable you to be with us this afternoon. So I'd like to thank you all for your very helpful responses. We have now reached the end of this session. We have got a few very exciting remaining items of business, which you're very welcome to stay for. However, should you wish to leave whilst we finish them off, you are very welcome to take your departure at this point in time. Could I ask the committee to note the report that we received in the discussions that we've just had this afternoon? Thank you. Could I also ask you to delegate authority to me as the chair, in conjunction with the party group lead members, to agree any output from this meeting? Is that agreed? Yes. Thank you. Item 7 on the agenda is the Environment Committee work programme on pages 115 to 18. Could I ask the committee to note our work programme? Thank you. And finally, our very last item of business is that our next meeting is scheduled for the 15th of July at 10 o'clock in this very place. There is no other business I consider urgent, and therefore this meeting is closed.